I'm going to now read from my book, No Third Way, the removal version, by myself, of course, Grace Musyoka. On the cover, we have clarification of the title, that the only solution is removing the corruption industrial complex. Before I read, some house warming rules or instructions. The first one is that after every chapter, I'm going to comment, should I need to. The other one is that I'm recording this at home on a weekend. There are a lot of people and kids are playing because of my son. So in case you hear noise, it's not background noise, it's just them. And third, I may add some elements of Kiswahili in my explanation, but I'll try as much as possible to repeat in English so that anybody can be able to understand, which is the main text and language that is used for the book. So I will begin. The first page. The following is testimony. Read it, pass it on. Leave it for the next reader. Return to it when the noise overwhelms. Basically, I made this to be a handbook, a small booklet that you can read very quickly, that you can understand as fast as possible, get the gist of the issues that have been overwhelmed with so many words and so many reforms and so many technical details that it becomes overwhelming for people to understand. So this is a book, especially when people are wondering, why don't we have food? Why is food expensive? Why is healthcare not possible? Why are people having to run away to other countries or immigrate to other countries for work? Then you can realize because there is no industry, because of ABCD, things like the education sector, the education system is designed for that specific role. Everything is working as it should in Kenya. In other words, you have just been put, too much has been added so that you are clouded from what it should be versus what you're experiencing. That is the first page. No Third Way is a second edition. I had done a first edition, which basically was a different cover. And this edition is in honor of the first journey. And the Dialectics Nexus publication is the company that is now going to be housing the podcast, the media elements, the publications like this, and the think tank that comes out of all the elements of governance, of politics and policies that we are going to be discussing as Kenyans. And the institute that covers the architecture of the Kenyan society, the African gaze, and also in terms of decolonizing the African mind. These things must be documented and written down, and they must be carried within an infrastructure that is able to, one, put it through an academic process so that it becomes easy to translate and adopt for as many Africans and Kenyans as possible, or just the globe, so that we start reclaiming our knowledge, whatever has been lost in our erasure as Africans and our knowledge. Secondly, the Institute will also carry with it the learnings, things like what now we have here, the publications, and all the elements of knowledge sharing that are just general, like this book. This book is on the corruption industrial complex. I published it in April, and now it's ready for distribution. I will not read the table of contents because I would be introducing every page on its own and for its own. So we go to page 3 of 36. It's under the preface, the confession of the lie. This is what they told us. Africans are corrupt. Africans are incompetent. Africans are lazy. Africans cannot build, cannot manage, cannot feed themselves. And because we could not, they said, we must open our doors. We must sell what we built. We must invite the foreigner to manage our ports, our hospitals, our schools, our grain. This was not advice. This was a curse spoken as a favor. The second way was not an economic model. It was a colonial-esque moral verdict dressed in a spreadsheet. And we believed it. For a generation, we believed it. No more. My dear listener, one of the things that I had to address today was somebody saying that if this book does not recommend asset recovery, then it doesn't work. And I had to be very clear that Kenya was first captured. Our resources, our assets, our own land, our people were captured for labor. Our land was turned into asset. That is what you call the initial capture of the Kenyan state, the architecture that created Kenya. And within that, we can see an entire framework. That framework is available for free in my Patreon page for whoever wants to look at how the Kenyan system has been designed. That with itself is now the reason why things get worse and worse and worse and where we are at this point. This happened both in the colonial times and post-colonial time because we just changed the flag and the rulers were now black like us, spoke our language, but the colonial systems have remained. This book does not address that. It addresses the things that have happened in post-colonial Kenya, and mainly in the last 20, 30-year period, where whatever had been looking as progress, where Kenyans just assumed if you are able to remove this theft, this capture, things will go back to normal. Right now, there is even no way to know how to shine a light back to what has been lost through the corruption industrial complex, through the rules that were instituted by what is mainly the United States under the imperialistic institutions of IMF, World Bank, and the donor sector, and the policy capture. That is why I am saying that advice was masqueraded as a spreadsheet. And that is why I'm also calling this colonial-esque. It is not the original colonization. It is now what in the intellectual circles, what the scholars call imperialism, neocolonialism. Therefore, this book, as I would also speak to that other commenter, same as this book, which was inspired by a comment, is that it starts to unveil, to remove what Kenya is bleeding from. Right now, we have no food. We have little to no access to medical care. We are wearing clothes that have been worn. We are wearing waste. We are wearing plastic. It is too expensive to live on a daily basis. The expenses of rent and transport are too much. The houses are also not built to par. Kenyans are suffering in that way, in that the basic life is now very expensive. And yet it is being managed by them. Our schools, our hospitals, our food, our grain, our port, our infrastructure is in their care. And we are seeing things getting worse and worse and worse. And therefore, this book addresses the second way. It addresses this new colonial thing. Kenya's first way, the grade one, was that capture. We are not there. The primitive accumulation was already done. This book now starts to unwrap this layer on top of primitive accumulation. So I hope this now brings to you the solutions that are in this book. It's that we are addressing the neocolonial element of the Kenyan system, not the colonial architecture that shaped or advised even the neocolonial system. And with that, we go to page 4. Take a break. Resume. The letter to the remnant. Grace, mercy, and truth to you who still remember that Kenya fed itself before the brokers came. I write to you not as a scholar, writing to scholars, but as a daughter, writing to a household that has been robbed. They have told you there is a third way, a path between the old and the new, between the state and the market. This is a lie designed to keep you searching while they steal. There is no third way, because the second way was never a path. it was a capture. The second way is the corruption industrial complex. It is the machinery that privatizes profit and socializes loss. It was built not in Nairobi, but in Washington, London, and even Dubai. It was installed here by policy, by loan conditionality, by laws rewritten in hotel conference rooms. And it runs not on ideology, but on a simple lie that you cannot do it yourself. Behold, you can. You always could. They only needed you to believe otherwise so they could take what is yours. This book is the removal of that lie. Read it, copy it, leave it on a table, cafe, or even a matatu seat for someone to read it. And when you read it once, like now, return, read it again and again, and the answers will become clear. So will the patterns become. The shortcut has been hiding in plain sight. As I had explained in the previous chapter, this book is about neocolonial policies. It's about the donor systems. It's about our policy capture so that now the rules are being bent and designed so that the role of government is basically to listen to what the donors, the development partners, their friends, the multinationals are telling them to do so that they can capture the state. This book is not addressing what you'd call the colonial wound. It is addressing what has been pervasive in the last 30 or so years. Page 5, the revelation of the great lie. In the quarter century since the new millennium dawned, we have witnessed the unfolding of a second coming, not of a savior, but of the architect of our own dispossession. It began with the great lie, a doctrine heralded a decade prior by the high priests of the West, the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, IMF, enforced by the silver-tongued management consultants of McKinsey and the like. They whispered into the ears of the continent that the African is inherently corrupt, that the Kenyan is lazy, and that our hands are too incompetent to hold the tools of our own prosperity. To save us from ourselves, they commanded that we open our gates to their markets and auction the very foundations of our nation, the institutions built by the sweat of independent generation to the highest bidder. Though the people resisted, there was found among the elites an apostle, a student of these Western economics, who was willing to do exactly as they commanded. By his hand, the prophecy of incompetence was made self-fulfilling. By dismantling the public good, he created the very chaos they used to justify further capture. They whitewashed their greed as policy, lobbying, and structural adjustment. They called it good governance. In the global north and Western allies, while in the south, it remained what it truly is, corruption. The state ceased to be a father and became a tax collector for the rich and the administrator of contracts for the elite, while the cries of the people were crushed as third world problems. Now, a Kenyan government enforces neoliberal policy as if it were Kenyan, but it is not Kenyan. It is a ghost wearing our flag. And what do we call, in any African language, a foreign structure that rules through the local people who benefit from it? We call it what it is, corruption. But in the West, they call it lobbying. They call it public-private partnership. They call it technical assistance. They call it good governance. Same act, different name. The name changes depending on who is doing to whom. I repeat, the name changes depending on who is doing it to whom. When an African politician gives a contract to his cousin, it is corruption. When a Western corporation writes a trade law and pays a Kenyan minister to pass it, that is policy engagement. Yes. So when you see the USAID, the NGOs, the GIZs, the Swiss, the UK aid, all these people writing our policies and then passing them off as ours, call it policy engagement, technical working groups. It is corruption. I'm not yet done. Let me finish reading but I needed to clap. Do you see the trick? Now you see it. The corruption is the same, only the vocabulary of shame is different. And this is something I have addressed very cleanly and very clearly at the end of the book, where I will show you how now I have captured the capture of Africa and the architecture of design so that Kenyans and Africans can have this inferiority complex around their resources. We don't have so much value because even the language that was used to describe us and our systems was also one that was designed to defeat us. But that's another story in another page, maybe page 36, I don't know. Let me finish this. And so Kenya became not a nation, but a contract. A place where the government collects taxes, regulates the rich, and administers contracts between itself, foreign capital, and the local elite. Show me one policy in Kenya, one activity in Kenya that right now is not going through this stool of administration. Collecting taxes, regulating the rich, administering contracts. You see, we have signed an agreement with IMF, with this bank, with this multinational, with this. And at the same time, nobody has done anything to help with the production of the Kenyan system. And that is our challenge. The people are an afterthought. The people are a crowd to be managed, and that is what Kenyans are, what Kenyans have become. The people are beneficiaries to be counted in donor reports. Isn't that what we are? Isn't that what their M&E and their reporting is about? Beneficiaries, impact, all that. Not results, not development. The people are protesters to be crushed because that is how Kenyans have been reduced by their government. Protesters. Right now, under Ruto, it is even worse. They are sometimes called terrorists. When they ask where the money is, this is the second way. This is the corruption industrial complex, and this is what we are removing. So I hope by now it is clear what the book is about, what it is addressing, and the scope of it, so that it doesn't leave you wondering where the other parts are. And as you can see, I've even I've given you the lay of the land to show you how I'll address what you'd call now the first layer of state capture. Now, let us now read the works of the third way. And we are going to have two parts. Part one is the origins of the third way. So I now go to page 8 of the book. Chapter 1, The Lie and Its Preachers. In the beginning of the betrayal, they did not come with guns. They came with reports. The World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the bilateral donors, the think tanks, the consultants who had never grown maize nor delivered a child in a rural clinic. And they said, your state is inefficient. Your people are corrupt. Your farmers are lazy. Your industries are dinosaurs. They said, you have no choice. Structural adjustment is the only medicine. Swallow it. And the government of Africa, the young, indebted, threatened government swallowed. This was not economics. This was the second coming of the colonizer. The first colonizer came with a flag and a Bible. The second colonizer comes with a loan and a policy brief. The first took land and called it crown. The second takes institutions and calls it reform. The first said, you are primitive, therefore we rule. The second says, you are corrupt, therefore we restructure. Same verdict, new vocabulary. And here is the cunning of it. They did not need to be here anymore. They wrote the laws into our constitution. They captured our procurement rules. They embedded their lobbyists in our ministries. They trained our economists in their universities. Now our Kenyan government enforces neoliberal policy as if it were Kenyan. But it is not Kenyan. That is the lie and its preachers. And you can see both their policy, their structure, and how they have even changed the vocabulary, and also who are the apostles, the people here who are implementing. So the enemy of the Kenyan right now is not that person who is in that other country. Who are these policy brief carriers? Who are these people who have been embedded in ministries by GIZ, by USAID, by IMF, by the World Bank? Even our own CSS, they are former employees of these institutions. Therefore, the enemy of the Kenyan is already the Kenyan who has assimilated, accumulated, and is now regurgitating the gospel of the neo-colonizer. That is the reality. And that is what we are addressing here. And therefore, whatever is being removed is this layer, this vomit, this regurgitate of Africans by Africans who have come to put what has been given to them by the neo-colonizer. Chapter 2, the mechanics of capture. How was this done? Not by force, by policy. They did not take the Kenya bus service at gunpoint. They defunded it. They said, see, public transport does not work. Let the private sector try. They did not ban local food. They did not remove tariffs. They removed tariffs, sorry. Then they said, see, the Kenyan maize is too expensive. Let Ugandans feed Kenyans. They did not close textile mills. They opened the border to Mitumba. Then they said, see, Kenyans prefer second-hand clothes. Let the markets decide. Each time, the state was made to look incompetent. Each time, privatization was offered as the cure. Each time, the cure was the disease. And the people were told, this is progress. This is modernity. This is how we develop. This is your only way. But a quarter of a century has passed. 3 generations have been born into this system. And now we have seen, now we have heard, now we have thought. And the verdict is this: there was never a third way. There was only the second way, and it must be removed too. What follows is a testimony of 6 sectors, 6 corruptions, 6 reversals. Each chapter is both an indictment and a blueprint. Read them as a verse, implement them as law. If they used laws and policies to capture Kenya in this way that they have done, then it is only by laws and policy that we can reverse this way, the third way. Kenyans, I'm going back to that comment that talks about asset capture. The first way and the first capture by the British was them turning the Kenyan people into labor and the Kenyan land into a private asset of the crown, of the king. And that is how they were given a charter to come and manage. And then they introduced their taxes and their monies, and Kenyans were forced to go work for them so they could pay taxes for this land and to exist here with the monies they have come with, paper they have come with, or coins, whatever they've come with, in exchange for our land and our people who are now turned into labor. This one is very easy to see, and removing it could have been easy with the fight for independence. In fact, that is the first now, that is what we call the second lie. In here, when independence came, we assumed we were getting back our land. And the people, fuck me, sorry. But we didn't. They continued the same system. And then, because now, thanks to other geopolitics, because remember, even colonization was designed and engaged elsewhere. The Berlin Conference happened in that country, in those countries in Europe, not here. The IMF and the World Bank and even the Charter and the UN and all these institutions were not formed here. Some people somewhere sat in a boardroom and decided in conferences and in halls and in missions, and decided for us. So we are here just taking what they give us. We have never had that thought to take back, to think. And that is why this book, which is what you'd call the final solution in terms of the Kenyan capture, is we start by the triage of what is bleeding, what is making Kenyans suffer, so that we can come out of the survival mode, at least reverse back Kenya to a 30-year period. The structural adjustment programs were introduced in 86. It is 2026. It is time now we addressed this before we can even now unburden ourselves of the neocolonial policies and then the colonial policies. I hope now this shows the thought, the methodical structure, and the intentionality of doing this book. I don't feel the need to defend it. I feel the need to explain it so that as you are reading, you are also in the right space of time, because everything is so complicated right now. Everything is such a mess. Everything is overwhelming at the same time, in the same way, in every aspect. There doesn't seem to be a path through the darkness. But now we know that the final problem, at least the problems we are wearing so heavily, the ones that are causing us sleepless nights, are policy-driven and entrenched through programs. And if that is the way, then we at least now know at least the one thread we can start unraveling to remove this fabric of capture of the Kenyan state. Thank you. We got part 2, which is now the removal of the book. We are still on the third way. Please have a look. There is an infographic, a diagram. I think I will use this and put them on the cover of the podcast. And this, I think, will be I'll name them. So I'll name them part 1, part 2, part 3, or whatever parts there are, so you can see the infographic. So this is the second infographic. I'll put it on the cover of the podcast. So chapter 3, the basics of food. Before the second way, Kenya grew enough food. There were strategic reserves. There were marketing boards that guaranteed minimum prices. There were seasons of surplus. Then came the lie. Your farmers are inefficient. Open your borders, let the regional market feed you. And the borders opened and the imports came. Because when you open borders, it's two ways. And the farmers, who were never inefficient, only unfinanced, became poor. This is the system we now dismantle, for food in Kenya remains colonized. The agricultural production system is structured for slave crops. Agricultural marketing system designed for export, not for local consumption. 1. Import dependency. Kenya imports food from Uganda and Tanzania while local farmers remain poor. That is a report by the Kenya National Bureau of Standards in 2025. So this is not a faraway history. Production versus consumption gap. Maize imports persist despite domestic production recovering to approximately 4.4 million tons. Yeah. Plantation model replication. Foreign actors, NGOs, donors, and carbon removal investors introduce new crops like avocado and macadamia that replicate plantation models designed for extraction market. That is from the FAO report of 2024. Much like coffee and sugar. The slave crops, the plantation crops that were introduced by the colonizers still keep being introduced in Kenya. And the same models produced here, so you sell abroad, are being introduced. That's what it means by production model replication. The final one is predatory value chains. Farmers sell at throwaway prices while food goes to waste. For the lucky, often connected few, produce is exported, but they pay for this privilege by accepting repressive prices or changing their entire operational models without any security or business guarantee. This system was not accidental. For example, you find mango farmers in Kenya were forced to change their entire crops in the hopes that the pulp will be bought by producers here, by processors here. But that has not changed. Some of it were even promised export market. But now we have more tonnage. Hundreds of thousands of metric tons of mangoes dying every year because only a few can be exported. And there is no design of how this can be addressed locally. That's what we mean when we say that we have predatory value chains. They want to pick the best and the rest is thrown away. That is the problem with our food systems in Kenya. So, a specific set of trade liberalization policies in the early 2000s removed protections for Kenyan farmers, opened the borders to regional imports, and prioritized export crops over food security. These policies dismantled marketing boards that once guaranteed minimum prices. The result was the privatization of agricultural value chains, and with privatization came brokers, lobbyists, and the corruption in industrial complex. This is a World Bank report of 2004 and Bates report of 2014. So in other words, we are now fully captured in our food system. Here is the solution: the 5 commandments of food. Number 1, block regional food imports. This is a policy level change. Basically, we must block food imports from the region to create local demand, ensuring farmers finally receive fair prices. Number 2, restore protections. Reintroduce the import tariffs on maize, rice, and sugar that were removed, and extend this to vegetables, pulses, and other staples to restore domestic demand. Number 3, block raw exports. End all policies that encourage low commodity exports or the rebranding of Kenyan produce, such as flowers or tea held in hubs like Dubai. This place for flowers, where is that? In the Dutch. Those ones. By foreign offshore entities. Because Dubai, a desert country, why is it the one processing our tea? Why? Ask yourself. And ask yourself as Kenyans, because I'll be interjecting things here that are of interest. Why? Although I should finish, let me finish, then come back to the Dubai issue. Sorry. Processing value must stay at home to drive jobs and industrial growth. We cannot have industrial growth while our things are the ones being used to fuel the industries of Dubai, of Amsterdam. Oh, that's the name. Plus, Amsterdam and the like. Same as we did for tea. They said Britain was the largest exporter of tea. Please. Number 4, prioritize domestic consumption. End the slave crop model entirely. Prioritizing Kenyan consumption is the only path to genuine food security. Number 5, restore strategic reserves. Reverse the privatization of National Cereals and Produce Board to ensure price stabilization and strategic reserves without broker capture. I have a quote here before I end. Farmers sell at throwaway prices while food goes to waste. This, I conclude, is not a third way. It is peeling back the corruption in intermediaries who have no productive role and returning to a logic where the state protects its own producers and consumers first. So I have something to say on the 5 commandments of food. Number 1, blocking regional food imports. The more we keep importing from Uganda and Tanzania, the more we enrich their farmers. It will be a momentary pain. But right now, even look at tomatoes. Foods go up and down. But if Kenyan farmers have that guarantee, even their financing, because we said the problem was financing. Previously, remember, Kenyans were not financed, especially farmers. Only the rich settler farmers could access loans. The financing model has remained a foreign model to Kenyans who need it. And when it happens, it is predatory. So that now they can be guaranteed that whenever I produce my crop, it will have, or livestock, it will have a customer. Secondly, restore protection. So if things have to come, they must be highly taxed, so the tariffs are high, so that now Kenyans can keep improving and trying to fill capacity, because we know capacity will be a problem. But for you now to be assured that if you grow your maize, your rice, and whatever, you'll have customers, then you should not be competing with the cheap imports. So the imports must be at the power of production. Then prices will start now going down, as now sustainability and risk is managed for the local farmers. Then block raw imports. This is the one I'm coming back to. We are feeding the industries of Dubai, of Amsterdam, and wherever. And Britain. Are we stupid? Yes, we are. We are stupid Kenyans. The Kenya tea farmer, for example, gets 300 shillings last year, per kilo of tea. But what they get in their pocket is less than 50 shillings, sometimes less than 25. And one of the people who benefit from this money is the DMCC, the dry port in Dubai, for processing and handling their tea. All these brokers and financial systems, like we've said, intermediaries and brokers who have no production value. Kwani Kenyans cannot process tea? In fact, the workers who are in the DMCC are also mostly Kenyans. We are stupid. Nani alituroga? Who bewitched us in that bad way? As I was saying, one of the biggest thing that I found when I went to talk about the tea sector was realizing that Kalenjins, a lot of Nilotes, because now they try to now rally the rest of them, think that they came from the Middle East or Egypt. And in fact, they say their darkness is only because of Jew intermarriage. Yet, by nature, by design, by their own phenotype, by their skin color, they come from Sudan. They don't seem to understand that the colonization of their biggest imports, not just tea, the Rift Valley, the clean energy, and also when you're going, yes, these things are being colonized. The carbon capture, what do you think it is? It is for them not to bring their fertilizer making plants there in the Rift Valley. You're being captured, your mind, so you are now welcoming them as brothers. Yet, Africa was black. If you look at Egypt, it was also black. But more important, it is the Nilotes of southern Sudan who went to Egypt to educate them, to civilize them. The first and 25th dynasties of Egypt were Sudanese. They taught them how to write, modern ways of building and construction. The pyramids were first done in Sudan. Then the slave trade that has gone on over 1,200 years introduced the Arabs to Africa. And Egypt, because it connects through the Red Sea, the peninsula, with the Arabians, became the port where they got entry. And in getting entry, they then colonized North Africa. They killed all the people, the black people. And you want, because now the ones remaining are Arabs, you want to become like the people who not only genocided your ancestors, but have colonized this land. Why is even Kenyan tea being processed in Egypt? We are idiots. We are idiots. We are fools. We have been made to hate ourselves so much. Those Arabs, they are colonizers of Africans. These are our resources that are being taken. And then now, when they do the dry ports in the Rift Valley, where do you think they are aiming? Look at what they've done to the gold in Sudan. The Nubian, the Kush kingdoms were never beaten even by the Persians. The Iranians here, who are defeating Americans in the year 2026, and the Israelis, they could not defeat Arabs. I mean, the Nubians, the Kush kingdom. They were unable to defeat them. That is how strong Africa has been. Africa was. That is what we want to return to. But this is not this book. It is not in this book, because this is a bigger book, a book that has not even been written. But we have to peel back from what we know, because from our point of knowledge, then we can start uncovering and discovering and basically removing the rot that has been brought in our heads. in our brains, in our system, in our education, in our way of thinking, until we uncover that original place of the African. And that is why we think the food, the tea that has gone to Dubai is better, yet imetoka hapa. There is nothing they add. There is no value they add. They just add jobs, manufacturing. They actually diminish its quality by mixing, which is understandable. We have the gold. Stupid. We are so stupid. So we prioritize domestic consumption. How can Kenyans be starving and food is going to waste? But more importantly, this we'll address in book 2. But in now the book of the architecture, Kenyans, when the British came, when the colonizers came, there was no famine in Kenya. This was unheard of. Yet now Kenya is reduced to a productive zone of almost 25% of the country, and the rest was marginalized. So we keep having the slave crop model where we are prioritizing crops that will feed the industries of the West and their hunger. So now look at avocado, macadamia, the new crops, and the mango that was introduced. Yet we don't have daily bread, we don't have food. Ukambani would be served by growing pulses, the ndengus, the mbaazi, the pigeon peas. So that is the green grams, the pigeon peas, the cow peas, all these peas that are needed. The kunde, that is the kales. What is kunde? Cow pigeon, whatever, cow peas. The food, the greens we need in large scale. It's a Mediterranean climate, for goodness sake. It can grow up to 4 crops a year. The water is there. All those rivers pass through Kambani going to the coast. They just need to be harnessed as watershed dam. All the waters flowing from the highlands of Kenya, all the water that floods Nairobi exits through Ukambani. The southern regions and all the waters coming from the Rift Valley exits through the western frontier. That is now Luo Nyanza, Western Kenya. That is why those are also the places that have the sweet potatoes, the cotton, the crops that would actually revitalize our carbohydrates and our textile industry, and the wheat, not the wheat, sorry, the sorghum and the millet. Why do you think those lands existed? Why do you think we never starved? Because these are the places where the food was used to supplement. And now we are here growing slave crops, crops that require too much water, too much fertilizer, and that fail 50-60% of the time. How often does maize fail? Have you ever had a season where kundes may fail? In fact, some people call kunde what are these things called? Invasive plants. Because if you plant them with your spinach, and sorry, those are not even spinach. Apparently, what we're consuming is not, it's char or something. It's not spinach, but whatever. They never leave. They grow there forever. They want you to keep buying those seeds, those exotic breeds. And yet, we now know, based on the lifestyle diseases Kenyans have developed and based on the poor health outcomes, that those are the better foods. We were just lied to start looking. You have terere versus spinach. Terere is healthier. It has more, it even has the slimy thing that helps with your stomach. And it will soften your kunde better. In growing what you call the Three Sisters, that is in the Indian, in Native American land. Sorry, Indian was the name they gave them. The Native Americans' land. Kenyans did that. They actually did not do 3, they did 4. Because Africa, we have better climates. We did not have the winters of the Americas. So we had 4. We always had the sorghum and the millet rising above. And yes, then we had the greens, the pulses. It was not just the beans. We had 3 types of pulses. There was always in every, go look at the farm. There was the mbaazi, that is the cowpeas, the pigeon peas, there was the ndengu down there. And those provided enough food. Because for the kamba, even when mudokoi was introduced, we did not consume maize as it was, for example. We consumed it as mudokoi, we removed the hard part, and we also consumed it as nzenga. Zenga is what you called the poor man's rice. It was crushed and it became almost as palatable as rice. So it was not this fine flour that is now can be added all sorts of things and sold to you as food. And then we had the squashes, because you always had to have the pumpkin and the squashes and then the calabash, because gourds were part of the utensils. But more than that, there was always a fruit. You had the pawpaw, the passion fruits. This is countrywide. And the bananas. Remember, these were part of the farm had, but within the crops, there was always the passion fruit at the edges, and there was the pineapple, the papaya, and the mangoes. The mangoes grew. There's a time mangoes were not sold in Kenya because there were too many. Everybody had them, and it wasn't a cost because they grow naturally. Moving on, we are now going to, we are finished with food now. I hope you are happy. We are going to chapter 4, the basics of clothing. And after chapter 4, I'll take a break again, but I'll resume. Before the second way, Kenya made its own clothes. This is page 13, by the way. Kenya made its own clothes. There were textile mills, there was cotton, there were jobs. Then the lie came. Your clothes are too expensive. Let the world's leftovers clothe you. And the borders opened to Mitumba, and the textile mills closed, and Kenya became a dumping ground. Kenya is one of the shamefully large dumping sites for the world's used clothing. Yet, President Ruto has explicitly ruled out a ban on Mitumba imports. Speaking on January 2026, Ruto said, "The policy of the government of Kenya recognizes that there is a segment of our nation's citizens, and it is a significant segment that relies on second-hand clothes. For that reason, we must maintain a balance between the market for new clothing and the market for second-hand clothing." That's a presidential statement in January of 2026. This quote-unquote balance is a political choice, not an economic necessity. And clearly, it is a policy-driven dependency. Because look at the words he says. I'm going to read that again. The policy of the government of Kenya, it is a policy, recognizes that there is a segment of the nation's citizens. And it is a significant segment. So he wants to make more poor people. Of course there are, William Ruto. That's a coffee. Let me sip it. And it is a significant segment that relies on second-hand clothes. If Kenyans can afford second-hand clothes as they do, they can afford new clothes, because new clothes, people, last for years. Years. For that reason, we must maintain a balance between the market for new clothing and the market for second-hand clothing. In other words, we must allow ourselves and our textile industry to be raped by the West. We must accept this industrial. They are going to clothe us in their leftovers or the new cheap plastic things that they make. We have no choice. It is the government policy of 2026, as read to us by William Ruto. Shindwe. Let me read the elements of this policy-driven dependency. Number 1, mass dependency. Approximately 2 million Kenyans rely on Mitumba trade. These are the traders. This is according to MITI 2024. So this number must have grown because more Kenyans have no jobs. 2 million. The export paradox. Kenya exported $470 million worth of apparel under AGOA in 2024, while simultaneously importing second-hand clothing. This is the 2025 report from USAITC. Yani, we give them the new things. You Kenyans. The Rwanda example. Rwanda banned Mitumba in 2018. While they lost AGOA benefits as a result, they proved that a ban is possible. This is from the Brookings Institution report of 2019. The question is not whether it can be done, but whether there is a political will to do so. In other words, the reason you are wearing Mitumba today is because the government decided you are not worth wearing new clothes. And you see them here bragging with their Italian whatever. Those leathers made from Kenya and Africa, imported from our lands there. There is a quote on page 14. The quote that opens that page says, 2 million Kenyans rely on the Mitumba trade. That means if we open our textile industry, we have a chance of making this 6 million Kenya job. Because if there are those traders will still have the jobs. Then they'll either upgrade to now having the textile shops for making dresses, or now the textile selling elements of importing and managing and warehousing, because they already are into trade. And then the rest will invest in cotton. And so you can imagine how many other jobs will just come as a result of just removing the Mitumba thing alone. The Mitumba economy exists because of deliberate trade policies of the early 2000s that opened Kenya to second-hand clothing imports as a condition for preferential access to Western markets. That's AGOA. What access is this we want? We can't feed ourselves. We can't clothe ourselves. What access is this? What has this, say the tea, the access to Kenyan tea and coffee in the West, imesaidiaje farmers? How has it helped Kenyans? It is the access by the brokers. They're the ones who want access, not us. At the same time, protections for the domestic textile industry, including cotton subsidies, local procurement requirements, and tariffs on imported fabrics, were systematically removed. The result, Kenya became a dumping ground while its own textile mills collapsed. That is Morrison et al. 2026 book. So let us go to the 5 commandments of clothing. Number 1, ban Mitumba. This is not negotiable. Implement 18-month transition for retaining the local production, then a full ban. That's it. 18-month transition for retaining and local production so that you don't, then full ban. This is even rational. So that people, those jobs, as I talked of, the 2 million jobs, can have a place to go. It's not like the way the day they just introduced and then things banned. And then Kenyans just woke up to this reality. This is even considered. Number 2, build domestic textile. Restore cotton subsidies, local procurement requirements, and tariffs on imported fabrics. This is still policy. Number 3, process locally. All Kenyan cotton, sisal, wool, and silk must be processed within Kenya before export. What is so hard about this? And by the way, these are not new technologies. We had them. We have had them. Limuru, wool, sisal in the coast of Kenya, silk in Ukambani, and all this Mediterranean climate silk, not sisal, and cotton, Luo Nyanza Ukambani. So you have something for the highlands, which is the wool, for the Mediterranean climates and tropical, that is Western Kenya and Ukambani, that is cotton. And then you can see silk also in Ukambani, Mediterranean, mainly because now it needs the rapid heat. And then you get now sisal for coastal Kenya. And by the way, Kenyans, as I read this book, you'll also start to realize the spaces that these industries were destroyed are national. Sure, We have talked of cotton and say sisal being in coastal Kenya and Ukambani and Western Kenya. And some people can think, oh, so they destroyed only the what you'd call opposition grounds or something. Because, coastal Kenya, Kenyatta government abused it. Same as coastal Kenya and Western Kenya. But Ukambani was also what you'd call, it's never, you get. But it's not that. Wool is in the central. So people have to realize that even if sometimes you're thinking that it is happening to them, it will not happen to us. It will happen to everybody. It will happen to us all. Yes, I said happen. My cucumber is showing and I'm going for a break, like I said, after this chapter. Then come back. So that you can be understanding when I come back and the tune, and maybe I'm coming back cooler because I've not been reading all this thing and it is making me kind of situation. All right. Number 4. End AGOA dependency. Basically, preferential access to Western markets is not worth the destruction of domestic industry. That's a fact. What is there in America? The jeans, we can buy those jeans. Who are the people who own this EPZ? Have you ever been to the EPZ? Last year, I helped design a campaign against the working conditions of Kenyans in the EPZ. No protection, the working hazardous climate, the mixing of those chemicals, the lack of equipment and the protective gear and the hours they work. We call them the shops of the Wahindi because they're the ones also with the contracts. And those rich elites. That is what we... Number 5, create industrial jobs. A domestic textile industry provides high-value industrial jobs, not precarious Mitumba trading. Kenyans, if you are educated, if you have ever gone to class 8, you have done your KCPE, you know that all nations grew with the textiles. Once the textile industry, even China, once your textile industry grows, then you are industrialized because textile takes care of the 3 big agrarian elements. Number 1, it is based off production of farming. Yes, cotton, the slave trade of cotton farming. Well, Africans are the ones. Do you know why they say Africans fueled the Industrial Revolution? Because they were captured for their labor to grow cotton in the Americas South and those states. And that cotton is the one that was used to fuel the Industrial Revolution. That money actually moved from the southern states to form the Wall Street. The Lehman Brothers, those, yeah, you know the names. They come from the blue and white state, the Jews. Yes. The ones who fueled the collapse of the 2008 due to the subprime mortgages. More lies upon more lies. They started there. The industrial revolution of the world was fueled by slave crops and textile. Because now after you grow the cotton or the wool, remember you improve animal husbandry, silk. Even look at what they did, the British, when they went to Hong Kong, when they were trying to get into China. They had never seen such. Because it grows, it depends on growing. The farming must be at peak, optimal. So you sow food. Because if you're improving farming, you are doing, and because things like silk farming, cotton farming require irrigation, you're also improving your mechanizing. Are you saying, look at now if you do animal husbandry, well, in Limuru, what does that do? It not even improves local production. There is manure, there is what, and people are now not stuck in monocropping. Also the fertilizer, the farms get rich. You move sheep from one padlock to the other. Then you follow with your crops. Hey, Kenyans, what happened to us? And so, with that cycle, then now people are satisfied. The base is satisfied. Then now they start weaving. creating the original yarn. That requires people aggregating the cottage industry, as you call it, in groups, putting their sisal together, their cotton, their silk, their wool. It is turning into something else. It was once a silkworm, it was once a crop. Now it is, you can touch it. It is big, it is magic. And then from this magic, you start dyeing, putting colors and making it interesting and patterns. And oh my gosh, it's creativity. Look at this. And then as you grow, so the dye industry, the colors, the mix, whatevers of pattern making, then you start creating computer machine learning. The original machine learnings are on textiles because you needed to train it on how to do these things in large scale. Even when you talk of sisal, people start making carpets and others are making these types of things and even beddings and other heavy stuff that go, and you're like, oh, you can even make a chair instead of now these sofas that are filled with sponges. You learn how to mix, how to crush. That is industrialization. And then from there, the jobs grow. You now have trade. Back to those 2 million people who are working in the Mitumba. That's why I said the jobs will come back. And they'll be bigger and better and they'll be secure because the traders are not circulating. They are selling what has been produced now to another market. And so you can now go to Limuru wool and you can get the best wool in the world, and that becomes the place where people come to get. Then it goes to the other industries. You'll see leather coming up because if you are mixing the textiles here, where is the leather? And think of so there you have it in Laikipia because of getting all these things from the north, Samburu, but that is how even this what you call pastoralist communities benefit. You get others in Isiolo. You get others now, Moyale, more Moyale than Isiolo. Then you get now in Masailand. Tanneries, and as you get the abattoirs then improve because the food production, because there is market, there is value. That is why textile is what you call the catalyst of industrial development. And until Kenyans, we can make our own crops, forget development, we will never, ever, ever see it. No, mutakuwa mnaiona kwa umbali. We will remain poor. The catalyst of textile farming industry, man, that is now what goes to high value jobs. Now is where you go machine and everything and magazines. Not magazines, but fashion. The kitenge, the kikoi, all these things that were Kenyan, were African. Look at how Africans dressed. Then now you go into appreciating our local stones. Hey, Kenyans, this is not a precarious thing. That is why it is under AGOA. For the sake of destroying your chances of future development, of industrialization, will give you access to preferred market. You bring your coffee, your tea, your whatever, by operating sweatshops in Kitengela, and then you can now, the brokers, because it's the Paris brothers and others, those are the people who export our tea and coffee. Who do you think does it? Do you think it's Kenyans? And the DMCCs in Dubai. In exchange for that, then kill your chances of development. If cotton farming had continued, the irrigation schemes in Ukambani, by now Ukambani and Western Kenya would have the best irrigation schemes in the region because you are sustaining an entire industry that relies, think, all Kenyan schools, hospitals, prisons, everything public is using Kenyan cotton. The breathable material, not this plastic crap. Anyway, before I go on the first break, I'm going to read the final story that I put here. It's in red, it's on page 14. It says, a Kenyan mother toils in an EPZ, stitching premium labor she can never afford. She is the engine of a global industry that pays her a pittance to clothe the world. In December 2025, the tragedy is total. Her son, a Form 4 graduate, mocks tailoring as a dead-end trade. Yes. Last year, December, a young man, came here on my channel and said, tailoring, you can finish Form 4 and tailoring is a job. If you don't understand, Kwani is like how, like mocking. Like how can a Form 4 person who has a KCSE certificate look at tailoring as a job? That is how we have been diminished. That is how we have been diminished, Kenyans who are listening, world. The rest of you from the world, don't laugh at us. That is how we have stopped to see, because people assume clothes must have been worn by somebody. This is how the mind has been captured. A Form 4 person is 18 or 19 this year, which means they were born past 2000, which means they have existed in a world. Fuck me. Fuck me. I understand why he said that now. I'm sorry. I know the video response was mocking, but also educational. But I'll go back and apologize, because this person has actually never seen us in that way. Oh, I'm so sorry. They cannot see that a tailoring job requires education and learning. Oh, Aki, we are so doomed. I'm sorry. Let me finish the story. He does not see that his mother has already mastered the craft. It's true. Because the mother works in a factory, a Wahindi, or some rich person. A factory that is faceless. A job that is... We have simply exported the dignity. Oh, yeah. And the profit to foreign lands. Now he stands in the dusty market to buy the discarded cast-offs of the very people she dressed. Even dust is preferable. Some of them are doing it in Gikosh, Gikomba, and other markets where you have running raw sewage and feces. You are even purchasing opportunity is a risk on itself, because thieves and other people want to snatch away from you. It is a security, personal hazard to even go and shop for these things. This is the state of which Kenyans have been reduced. If you cannot cry for Kenya, if you cannot see what is the benefit? Who has benefited? And the tea farmers, these preferential things, they are even poorer now than they were when those AGOA deals were done. Kenyans. Let me finish the story, because I have to. We provide the sweat for their newness, then import their waste and call it cheap. Akiruto. Now, I'll use the words Ruto used. Let me go back. Ruto said, the policy of the government of Kenya recognizes that there is a segment of our nation's citizens, and it's a significant segment. Now they are not the segments. We are now statistics. Like I said, spreadsheets. These people come with spreadsheets. And it is a significant segment that relies on second-hand clothes. For that reason, we must maintain a balance between the market for new clothing and the market. So it's market. It's market. It's market. Segment, significant segment market. We kill our meals. Glorify the dumping of leftovers. Leftovers. The ukamba in me is defeating purpose. Leftovers. And teach our children to laugh at the skills that could save them. This is not an economy. It is a structural humiliation. And I agree. I know, by the way, when you write a book, and if you've been to my channel, I speak, and then later is when I react. So I speak like speaking. I learn the matter, I get the facts, then I go speaking. I do that on the road, or on my desk, wherever I'm doing. So when you're writing, it is coming out, and it is coming out raw. And so I think when I was writing, these are the emotions that came of it, and now they have returned, but I had forgotten. Because I did this actually in March or something, in April, early April, because I wrote this in about 4 days. So it was very emotionally packed, because it's also a small book. It's a handbook. I wanted it to be like that. And now I can see that I did not lose the emotion by shortening it and making it into a handbook format. And the audio version is helping to bring this into fruition. Because I did not think that the humiliation was not even going to come from food, but clothing. But by now, I think you can understand the basis of clothing. And I think I've been able to put for you that the textile industry is the key industry for every civilization, for every nation, for every people. And they have humiliated us and they continue to humiliate us. And the president is using words and phrases that have been borrowed, market segments and balance. Balance for whom? Balance for whom, Mr. President? Because we are in the dumping site. We are in the recycle bin. They don't even want to recycle there because it's too expensive to recycle. There's no balance here, sir. Balance left the chart a long time ago. We are not even in the equation. It's like they bring it here and forget. Do we even have a removal process for this dumped Mitumba? We don't. We are out of the equation. The moment it is discarded and shipped by the rich and the elite, it's over. They've made their money. And when the elite come here, they're not even the workers of the 200 people. What balance? What balance? What balance, Mr. President? There's no balance here. We are the trodden. We are the humiliated. We have killed our industries, our country, our nation, our esteem for a trade deal that is just 400. Let's look at the words because the words are here. The figures are here. $470 million. For that, we killed everything. Please, there is no balance. There is no third way. We must recapture textiles. Otherwise, we will never develop, and that's a fact. To fuel farming, because food is cheap. Let me show you the relationship between textile and farming. Because food is cheap and must be maintained cheap, you need a commercial value. You need a reason for that irrigation system to be invested in, and it must be not just the food and food processing, because it will be too expensive if it is the one to repay back the industrial and economic financing that is put into that market, that segment. Textile is what covers that loss. And this is something that must be done on a national level. It cannot be left to counties. It is the thing that the nation must address. And with that, let me take another break. When I return, before I go, I'm sorry. I want to end on a good note. When we're talking about how people are silenced, and I specifically applied this to women because I had been applying the same thing to my channel and how the insults came to me as a woman. But I said the third level that we had arrived at is now the tone policing, where you're told not to be emotional, where you are supposed to use numbers like the significant segment, not the majority of our people are wearing Mitumba. And market and balance, where you're saying we must keep the rich happy and the poor, we don't care. Is you remove emotion. And we are at that point where the people are saying, remove the emotion out of it. You see what happens when you remove the emotion. And yes, if you don't know, the 3 levels that I have been able to catch have also been progressive from the base level to now the 3rd tier level of silencing of people, of culture, and of society, but specifically women, because women are the blueprint for this. The first one is the base level. The base level is violent, threatening the natural, the existence of every woman. That is, niliambiwa when I started this talking, wewe enda uza kuma ukambani. It's like, if you are a woman and she has a vagina, she's not worthy listening to, because there is no value to a woman. This is the violent threat and the erasure of the womanhood. But in this case, it also applies to the African, like Africans, they should go do the primitive things. So I can apply it in universal basis. Plug yourself where you are. Men, don't be offended. Women, don't be offended. We are talking the facts that have happened. And then we go to the 2nd level. So after this one that applies to all, because at any one time as a woman or as an African, you'll be dragged to that base level of being told you're an African, you are black, you're a colonial, you're a subhuman, you're a monkey, you're a nigger. You are a woman. You have a vagina. You have a black skin. If that does not work, then they realize they need you, they want you, so they welcome you to their places. And then here is where they require you to be the Madonna, the virtue signal, the nun. They tell you, you can be a woman, but you cannot be too woman. You can be black, but not too black. Si munajua hiyo. You can be an African, but not too African. So don't show us that. You must comply to us. So as a woman, you can only wear clothes like this. They must not show this because our men are likely to be, the men will attack you. If you become too woman, you'll be attacked. So this applied for women. So if it is African, if you're too African, then the whites will get offended because you are reminding them of that they have tried to erase you. And that is the violence that we can erase you. Because when they say you can be attacked, it's that we will attack you. We are still exerting the first level of violence. But this one is now dressed up. You get what I mean? It's like a ladder. Remember, at the end of the day, you are a woman or you are black. So if you dare show a bit of that in this second level, we'll return you. But we'll welcome you because you have brains, you can think. This one, the reader told me, Grace, we don't show your cleavage. We can hear you without having to show your cleavage. Ladies and gentlemen, I live in Ukambani. It was in February. It is hot. The clothes you wear must allow for sweating. This guy wanted me to cover myself because he felt it offensive. It is called control. It is called conditioning. You are conditioned now not to be yourself, not to be too female, so that you can be kept in that box. But then we arrived at the third level, which is now policing. Policing is by everybody. Everybody who is an elite can be a police. You are only policed by the elite. That is why they talk of things like political correctness is only applied by the rich. The manners, the British, the table manners and all this. The policing is only by the elite. The intellectuals now start saying, remove emotions. Use boardroom talk. This is not corporate. This is not appropriate. So this one is telling me you are too emotional. So I had to remind people the ladder that I have climbed so that now the only thing people have against me is the emotion. As I talk about the theft of the African land, of the Kenyan, of our dignity, of our resources, of our very existence, through simple things as boardroom policies passed in London, in Dubai, in Washington, here in Nairobi, because they've also brought them here in Nairobi, by people whose work is to sit and eat and smoke as we labor for them. And you don't want me to have emotion because it makes it sound so crude and feel so real and it is so raw. But because I am also in love with my blood pressure and it is also very draining, I'm going to go back, make lunch for my son and for myself and do things, and then we'll return after lunch to page 15. The basics of housing. 15 is almost halfway the book. So when I'll come back, the tone will be changed. So breathe. If you are driving or whatever you're doing, take a commercial break now. We'll come back and resume. Sponsored by Grace's Emotions. Enjoy. We resume where we left off at that moment, that day when I was going for lunch, because it's no longer that day or that moment. But now we continue the podcast with chapter 5, which is page 15 of 36. Here we go to the basics of housing, and I'm going to read first. Before the second way, housing was understood as a social right, not a commodity. Then came the lie. The private sector builds better, let them do it. And public housing mandates were removed. Land speculation became the norm, and the poor were priced out of shelter. Ruto's affordable housing program appears beneficial on paper, but it is a state of capture of resources and land. Why? Because it turns the government into a landlord. A model Kenya has tried and failed before, and its failure is documented. So we have these elements. 1, affordability gap. The majority cannot afford these units because there are no jobs to sustain payments of the affordable houses by William Ruto. Secondly, rental capture. The rich will purchase them as rental properties, not homes for the poor. So whatever has been built using Kenya's money, Kenya's public resources, Kenya's public land will now be turned into a private property for the rich that they will use not to create houses, but to become properties for rental. So Kenyans are still in the same place they were, but this time they are poorer. The government has borrowed more, and the state resources that they previously had, including that land, has now gone into private hands. That is the element of state capture under William Ruto's affordable housing. Continuing, geographic mismatch. They are built in urban consumption centers, not production zones. This is actually the biggest, what I would call, mismatch and contradiction when it comes to affordable housing. Previously, when the government really built houses in Kenya, they did that at the point of production. So that if it were schools, they were built within the school compound, right? If people are working in, look at public houses, you'd go to, say, National Serious Board in a place, in a remote place, there is a government housing because people are going to be coming there to work, and that's a production center, and therefore houses are constructed. They are tied, their salaries will pay for that. Police, doctors, all hospitals previously used to have staff quarters. These were tied to the fact that the people working there would be able to afford, and it is part of the benefit. But as we saw, the public housing mandates were removed. So initially, they were done so well. When you look at how Kibaki did it, it was so insidious, but so genius if you are a capitalist, because it's like first housing allowance, then this is saying, not why are government workers demanding housing allowance? That's how the conversion was started. Like, we know these are corrupt, useless people. Let them not have it. And then from there, public workers, now private employers, private workers, now corporate employers, business people, then removed that it was now removed from the pay slip. Previously, it had been required that you pay housing and transportation. And so those were removed because if the government is not giving or it has reduced, then why should private do? And who are the private owners? They are people, the elite who had captured Kenya during the first capture. And now these big businesses, small or big, were no longer required to do this. So it was done in a way that looked conversational. And so land speculation, from that moment, now people are told, go buy loans, buy land, build a home. So then it was speculated. So the rich now, who are now beneficiaries of the state capture, particularly under Kibaki, became land speculators. If you look at Tatu City, Konza City, these programs will never come to be, or they'll be too expensive for normal Kenyans to afford, as Ruto's affordable housing has been, because they're all now based on land speculation. In fact, one of the biggest challenges we've had bringing industrialists into Kenya is that there is no affordable land that is accessible. Accessible meaning because of the geographic mismatch that we've talked about. Remember, we talked of the affordability gap so far, the rental capture, and the geographic mismatch that you find houses are built in consumption area. So if anybody now wants to even invest in that, you can't, because land speculation now in places that are expected to be the next frontier are too much. If the government identifies an aggregation zone, a hospital, whatever, no hospitals, they don't do that anymore, but whatever infrastructure, it becomes a place of speculation. That is how the Kenyan land is being handled now by the political elite. We go to the fifth element of the characteristics of land capture now, which is extractive frontiers. Under William Ruto, mineral-rich regions remain underdeveloped in Kenya, not just under William Ruto. So let me read that again. I was reading about the issues of the affordable housing. We have extractive frontiers. Meanwhile, mineral-rich regions remain underdeveloped despite being designated as strategic zones by the Ministry of Mining in 2023. So, privatization of housing and urban development began with policies that removed housing mandates from government. They also encouraged public-private partnerships as the primary delivery mechanism, as it is happening under William Ruto and previously. Remember the NYS, all these buildings that were constructed later years, all these scandals are linked to PPPs and treated housing as consumption good rather than a social right. So now only certain people can enjoy houses. And finally, land policies from the same era made speculation easier for connected elites and community land harder to protect. So While William Ruto is promoting affordable housing, as you've said, it is done in geographic mismatch in places of consumption, so mainly urban centers. Yet, the extraction frontiers that would now become elements of where affordable housing is actually needed and it could actually be matched to a career or what you're calling a production unit is not happening. If you look at the places that were designated as places of strategic minerals, we're talking of Isiolo, Migori, Kitui, Taita Taveta, Tharaka Nithi, Moyale, Kajiado, deep Laisamis, all these places, Kilifi, the entirety of Coast, these places are now where the government and their traditional Pokot, Samburu, Northern Laikipia, Doldol, those areas, Baringo counties, these are regions that we know have been neglected. They are literally neglected regions. Makueni. If now you went there, the formerly marginalized hardship areas, as you call them, if they're the ones that got affordable housing, then it becomes easier now for the rest of Kenyans, engineers, doctors, teachers. Schools would be set up because now the workers who would go there to work with those in those regions with strategic minerals, then they would find a place worth working. Because mining is a 20 to 30, 40-year career. If you went now immediately after university as a geology graduate, or you went after Form 4 as a miner who is going to get training skills at 18, 19, it means that by the time you are 40, you'll have paid for that house. You'll have affordable housing because your career, whatever salary starts, they will match it to your income. And so you can even now go there with your family. You don't have to struggle. And now the other things, the social elements would come in. But why are they still building them in towns, in Nairobi, in Machakos, in Kiambu, in places that already don't have any more jobs? That is the mismatch we're talking about. And then they're not able to go to the extractive frontiers. So they are not helping where help is supposed to be happening. It is just making the situation worse. And that is the state. So when you look at how this went, the privatization of housing and urban development, it is now policies that removed public housing mandates from government. As I said, that is how Kibaki did it. He did it clearly. And then they encouraged PPPs as the primary delivery mechanism. You know that. Kibaki, Uhuru, and now Ruto. They are PPPs. PPPs. These are just rich, connected elites. And then they treated housing as a consumption good rather than a social right. So only people who have a certain caliber can work, not necessarily the government creating. So the government stopped making it like we have work, housing must be part of it. But now it's like private people come, speculate, make money. That is actually how most people now are pushed into housing. And so land policies from the same era made speculation easier for connected elites and community land harder to protect. You've seen what happens in Taita Taveta, what happens in Makueni County. Look at Konza. So that now you can't protect because people say, this is our land, let's sell it and make money. And that is the problem of Kenya's land and housing. It has now been fully captured by the elite. So the sequence of removal when it comes to the basics of housing, are as follows, not land, housing. Phase 1, building public houses in marginalized resource-rich regions. This we have clearly identified. So Samburu for chromite, Kwale for niobium and rare earth elements, Embu for coltan, Isiolo, Kitui, Migori, and Taita Taveta for copper, Tharaka Nithi, Wajir, and Marsabit for beryllium, and Tana River for manganese. This manganese, this beryllium, all these elements that were captured by the state and said you can no longer mine them, they are strategic minerals. What is the strategy of that to deliver the strategic mineral wealth back to Kenyans? Affordable housing would actually pay for itself if it was done within those regions. Part of the mining, the arrangement is that these houses are done so that people can be able to come and work here and live in decent homes. That's a point of phase 1. Because then you have a way to pay for the affordable housing in Kenya. It is not tied to salaries. It is not tied to pay slip. There is no housing levy. Are you now seeing the difference? If there is no housing levy, then Kenyans are freed from the burden of punitive taxes. Secondly, create work-led migration. So This creates natural movement of hundreds of thousands of workers from urban centers to work-led migration hubs, because you're going to Samburu, there is a house. You're going to Tarakaniti, there is a house. You're going to Tana River, you're going to Lamu. These places, remember that they have been largely marginalized. So then people are able to ease from urban centers and go work there. And remember, I'm only touching on mining. I've not even touched on farming, but farming is very much tied to land that people already have, and communities don't need so many other workers to come in. So mining, for me, the reason I identified it, should you ask, is because it is a natural resource of Kenya that has never been extracted and utilized since independence, number one. Number two, the government of Kenya under William Ruto in 2023, 50 years or 60 years post-independence, captured them, and then has been unable to, when you say you have national housing program and strategic minerals, but you're unable to mix 1 + 1 to create 2, then that is a problem. So it is a problem that can be resolved using the same problem they created by designating them to be strategic minerals, and yet providing no avenue for extraction by locals, because then if that is not done, it will be captured by foreigners. The things we are seeing from the Macrons coming here to Kenya to capture our land. Remember, our minerals. Macron, the France have lived by being parasites of the African continent. The Franco France. Look at the places that these minerals are. They're already marginalized regions. If they come, the French, if they do come and they're given these rights of extraction, they are going to be in those places that are already so marginalized. And when they cry, Kenyans are not going to listen, because we are not so kind to these people. We have called them lazy, stupid, behind, backwards, uncivilized ourselves as Kenyans. Yet these jobs would be the jobs that our urban people who are working bad jobs in urban centers would migrate to do. Because when you have a community of people mining, you need teachers, you need schools, you need hotels, you need all these other amenities that are in towns. You get what I mean? We are blinded by just focusing on Nairobi and the main other urban centers. Phase, we are still on the phase. So ease urban pressure, I've already mentioned this. By creating alternative centers of work and life, slum populations can move voluntarily into productive housing connected to mineral extraction and agriculture. So here I bring up agriculture, and yes, it is true, because the more work in agriculture becomes mechanized, we then start to see a lot of processing, and that translates to more work that is pushed from the urban poor who have pushed there who have migrated there by force, by circumstances, not because it's a voluntary exercise. Then we look at the rest. The other part in the phase 1 is build horizontals first. This is develop the roads, water, and power alongside housing to create production hubs. This speaks for itself. Right now, those places you can't go, there's no power. There's a reason people don't go back there. The amenities are not there. And finally, stimulate production. Use housing to create demand for local materials, labor, ending the get-rich schemes for wealthy landlords. That's it. No more PPPs. Simple. If you're coming here to be the one extracting manganese, right? Your work is, part of the investment is helping with the horizontals, and because you have a 20, 30-year lease, and then, of course, using local labor, people, Kenyans. So, and you can see this is also part of the problem with what we call the initial centralized economy for slave crops, because Kenya was so focused on slave crops, and so that industries and development was pushed to what you call the former White Islands, right? Because even the other crops that were outside the White Islands have never really been even given an element of focus by the national government. And so you can see the unequal development that went there. Those places had cooperatives, they had all sorts of roads and every infrastructure. In fact, one of the justifications for building Thika Road was to say a lot of processed foods are coming from the Mount Kenya region, so we need this road. But then you think the voluminity of it is reduced now. There are more places that could actually produce more and better for longer, but that was not that. But also it's because this is the only place that looked capable. We are not denying that. We are saying the rest of Kenya could equally look like that if at all the government, national government, and now central government, because you have now the national government, they have taken those as strategic minerals. So it's under them. It's not even under counties now. So that when they'll be now being captured and being stolen from, people will be quiet because they'll be like, your county should protect you. They can't. Housing is a national issue now. Land remains in Kenya a national issue. And you can see how land will be taken from Kenyans whose land was made deliberately poor over time because of now devolution. People will be like, they can't even defend them because like you have your counties. Stop. Right. So we got to phase 2. Phase 2 is now return to mend the city. Once population pressure is reduced through phase 1, return to urban centers to mend drainage, roads, and markets without displacing people in chaos. One of the things we saw was that when you create alternative centers of work, people are moving voluntarily, not like the way they are being forced by Gikomba upgrades, Githurai markets. Those things are happening because there's nowhere for people to go. But after you have eased people have realized, oh, you can have your own Githurai market in Tharaka-Nithi, in Isiolo, in wherever. Then, in Nairobi, then you can clear and you tell them, this is not how we are going to have our city look like. Same as Nakuru, Kisumu, and Mombasa. Because then there's no more pressure. Then secondly, build strategically. Make all new public housing rent to own at cost. Rent to own at cost. Not for profit to prevent landlord capture entirely, because that is what Ruto has done. In fact, can you imagine how cruel and blatantly corrupt the system is, that they did not say, all right, Kenyans cannot afford, but if you're going to get this place, it will be rent to own. You can imagine how many Kenyans, if we have the affordable houses in Machakos, we would have moved there, made those our future homes, and then paid the government slowly over time. We would be there 15, 20 years and have paid, rather than continuing to pay rent. They just added more landlords in Machakos. And these landlords are enjoying these publicly developed products. Kwenda huko. So, the quote for this is, build public housing in marginalized resource-rich regions first, then return to mend the cities. That is the way. And so this is not a third way. This is reversing the policy that concentrated all development in Nairobi, Mombasa, and Kisumu, while leaving the rest of Kenya as extractive frontier with no housing, no infrastructure, and no future. Marginalization of Kenya happened that even the roads, everything that was being done, you can imagine all Kenyans, for example, contribute to the payment of Thika Road and all these other roads that are nationalized, and yet they're only in specific regions. And what happened? These other Kenyans then have to come to Nairobi because that's where all our resources and development seems to be focused on. And this is how you address that inequality that has been here for now 70 years or so. That is chapter 5 on housing. We now go to transport. Page 17. The chapter 6, the basics of transport. I read, before the second wave, there was Kenya Bus, a functioning public service. Then came the lie. Public transport is inefficient. Let the private sector run it. And the Kenya Bus service was dismantled. Matatu cartels filled the vacuum, and the commuter was left to chaos. Kenya urban transport is a chaos of private matatus, cartels, and pollution. There is no coordinated system. Drainage is non-existent in most urban centers, and sidewalks are absent, resulting in death, disease, and lost productivity. The collapse of the Kenyan bus service, I think this part is supposed to be under housing, not drainage, not transport. But the sidewalks part applies here. The collapse of the Kenya bus service led to a vacuum filled by matatu cartels. This is a quotation by Klopp in 2012. And remember, 2012 was barely 10 years after the collapse. So by then, you can imagine how worse this condition has become in 2026. This traces directly to transport privatization. I'm still reading. Devolved planning without fiscal support. This is the World Bank report of 2016. The collapse, so even planning has been devolved. The collapse of public transport began with policies in the early 1990s and early 2000s that privatized bus services. Urban planning was simultaneously devolved without funding, leaving counties unable to build basic drainage or pedestrian infrastructure. Right, so drainage and urban planning are coming together with the basics of transport because they are interlinked. So the sequence of removal when it comes to public transport is declare public transport a public good. Phase 1, Public Transport Authority buy and buyout. Begin acquiring matatu routes through buyouts, not force, right? So buyouts, buy this route, buy this route. By buying is introduce solar, cost-efficient vehicles that chase away people, but also those who want to participate can be bought off. So that they are so you start by first introducing buyout is a very structured system. It's not chaotic. You introduce cheaper solar powered buses that are large enough to carry people. So if the route from Githurai to Nairobi cost 100 bob in the morning, these ones are going to cost like 40 shillings and they'll carry more people. So not only are you going to sweep more people into this vehicle, they are going to be like 100 people for one vehicle paying 40 shillings so that people are actually going to be willing. And as demand comes out, these people are going to be forced out of it and they'll move to other places, so on and so forth, until they're what you call their investment, they recoup it, but also they are aware because it's not being done in the dark. And remember, they are not coming back as PPPs or whatever. No, they are being chased out by market. So it's not forced. It is how the market is operating. Secondly, create a single public transport authority in the Nairobi metropolitan area, Mombasa, Kisumu, Nakuru, and Eldoret. Yeah. When Uhuru Kenyatta took and created that Nairobi metropolitan, it appeared like it was a way either to remove Sonko and to show incompetence so that, because Nairobi is 40% of our GDP or activity. And so taking that away from Sonko was like, we're taking the biggest thing from you because there was a threat of Sonko. Sonko was not playing by their rules. And so this is more political than policy, but that is my analysis, which I'll be looking at this week. So this tells you how far things have gone, because this week I've been talking about the similarities between Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto, them being one side of the same coin, literally no difference. William Ruto removed Gachagua, Uhuru Kenyatta removed Sonko. He was the biggest threat to his reign and the Uhuru Ruto government. So phase 2, electric transition, 6 to 8 months, which is very possible. Introduce publicly owned electric buses on major corridors while keeping matatus on feeder routes temporarily. Exactly. So this will still be a temporary measure for them to be kept. Build capacity and modernize the fleet without creating mass overnight unemployment. So capacity to modernize the fleet. It's not done like the way Mishuki captured Kenya Bus. He just came overnight, the Mishuki rules, you must comply. Then Kenya Bus Service, which was public, which they were in charge of government, they refused to fund it and provide for it, and therefore it collapsed overnight, just like that. And remember, the managers of Kenya Bus Service actually went to set their competing bus services, and those ones were profitable and well managed. How ironical. Phase 3, unified system, 2 years. Complete buyout, all urban transport becomes public with unified ticketing and schedule services. Exactly. So that now price transparency, management, and every Kenyan is looking. We have seen that in Kenya when there is price transparency, when everybody is observing and workers know and everybody knows the expectation, Kenyans are self-policing. And therefore, remove the cartel layer entirely and provide dignity to commuters. Because I think they've forgotten that they are commuter. We are disregarded in this. Even the police on the public roads, transport police, traffic police, and TSA, their work is just to police the matatus or where they make the money. It doesn't seem to, they've forgotten that commuters, the Kenyans, are the people they are serving. It is all self-service games and PR stunts of showing they are arresting people. And yet Kenyans continue to wallow under the same bad conditions and punitive fares and conditions of transport day in, day out, and nobody ever comes to do stings on them to check their conditions. So the quote for this is 100% public transport, sequential, not force, buyouts, and dignity. That is the message. This is the opposite of policies that created the problem. These policies concentrated everything in 2 or 3 cities. This shortcut spreads development, so no city bursts. Remember, public transport initially was mainly Mombasa and Nairobi. So even its closure was so fast and instantaneous. If you have public transport, not just concentrated in Nairobi or Mombasa, or now all the metropolitans or big cities, if it is everywhere, then over time, the cartels will not have a way back in. That's what it means. That if it is everywhere at once in 2 to 3 years, then you know that returning is going to be a huge, huge problem. It will take decades. So the quote here is, the collapse of public transport was engineered through the systemic defunding of the Kenya bus service. Upon its ruin, former senior managers and directors emerged not as failures, but as overnight billionaires, transitioning to found and operate some of the nation's most successful private bus companies. That is a word by Klopp, 2012, and the World Bank report of 2016. Yes. Simultaneously, the 2004 Musyoka rules, though framed as a move towards safety and order, became a predatory get-rich scheme. Politically connected individuals and government insiders, secured monopolies as the sole distributors of mandatory speed governors and seatbelts, extracting billions from the industry while the public system was left to rot, like I've said. So this is by Chitere et al. 2004 and also Miga 2007 report. And that concludes transport, page 17 and 18. So the issue of, I just want to clarify, the issue of drainage is connected because sidewalks are absent. So people die, that's part of the transport issue in Kenya. Though this and the planning of it, transportation also being devolved is also an issue because it went there without urban planning and transportation. It's the devolved function, but with little funding. And that's another concern. A takeaway in terms of policy and in terms of what was written here. If it becomes problematic, I can edit this in a future edition, like the edition number 2, but for now, this will remain. So we now go to chapter 7, the basics of healthcare. I'll read. Before the second wave, public hospitals served the many, not just the few. Then came the lie. Private healthcare is more efficient. Let them complement, and public hospitals were defunded. Private wings were added, and the poor were left to die while the rich were healed. That's a fact. Kenya's healthcare system is structurally split. While 394 billion shillings was allocated to healthcare protection in 2025-2026, the Social Health Insurance Fund, SHIF, is designed to complement private insurance instead of replacing it. That's according to Treasury 2025. So you put in billions into the healthcare sector, that is 93.4 billion. Yet, public-private partnerships, PPPs, that redirect public funds into private facilities. That is the 2021, Barasa et al. 2021. So you put in all this money for health, but PPPs redirect this money into private hands. So we create the parallel system, which is the first issue in the healthcare sector, which says SHIF is designed to complement private insurance rather than replace it, maintaining the two-tier structure. So under William Ruto, instead of removing the two-tier structure, he just rebranded from National NHIF to SHIF, and then here it still does the same thing. So it is there to supplement and complement the private healthcare structure. Number 2, formalized capture. PPPs are being formalized while elite institutions like Aga Khan University Hospital and with elite institutions, like the Aga Khan University Hospital and Nairobi Hospital. Number 3, county handholding. Counties are effectively handholding healthcare for investors and speculators to later buy out failed public hospitals. I mean, we have done this dance before. That's what they do to all the factories, everything. Hospitals are like factories for diseases and healthcare, right? So at one time they'll say, Machakos County Hospital level 5 is too expensive, too much debt. Somebody is going to buy it and it will be operated privately sooner than later, because under the current governor, and because of the privatization and the PPPs that go on in all public hospitals, where cleaners, service providers are paid through a contractor who has been given the contract by government to be the one to hire people for cleaners and all that, the services are barely there. People can barely go there for treatment. And so somebody will come and say, too much debt, there are so many unpaid salaries, so many arrears, let's privatize it. That's what's going to happen. So we are basically hand-holding them for the private elites to come and capture. And that's what happens. So the state attempt to reconcile these two irreconcilable goals, public healthcare and private wealth, has reached its breaking point. That's a fact. The fact that in 2025, 2026, the only thing they could do with this is to rebrand from NHIF to SHIF. It's a big problem. We have a big problem. The parable of the hyena. This is a story I've given. In this, Kenya's health care system reads like the famous cautionary tale of the greedy hyena. Walking along, the hyena smells the aroma of barbecuing meat. As he approaches, mouth-watering, the path splits into two. Greedy and unwilling to risk missing out on either path, he plants his feet on both diverging trails. As the distance between the paths increases, he is stretched and stretched and stretched until he bursts open and dies. Kenya's healthcare system, and by extension any sector that tries to serve both public good and private profit simultaneously, is that hyena. You cannot stand on two diverging paths. You must choose. That is why. So the 5 commandments of healthcare. Number 1, end private insurance coverage for public officers. That's the first one. Basically, stop all public funding to private insurance immediately. There must be no taxpayer coin directed to private insurers. If you do this, first of all, you're going to remove all this private insurance created by all these former public and current public officers who created insurance agencies, insurance companies, because they can be able to direct to themselves the money from government. That is the first thing. Because without private insurance, even the private hospitals and the hospital tourism to India ends and people get treated in the country. Number 2, so you choke them. You choke the private insurance and private hospitals by no private insurance. Number 2, unified public coverage. Move all government workers to public insurance immediately. Not a single government employee, from the clerk to the cabinet secretary to the president, should be on private insurance. In the US, even they say the president is treated at Walter Reed. I have a call. Let me see if I can bounce it. Oh, recording resumed. Okay, so we talked about that everybody should be on should be on. Not a single government employee, from the clerk to the cabinet secretary, should be on private insurance. And the president too. I was talking about having the president at Walter Reed, like the best military hospitals. We have a lot of hospitals within our military, within our centers, that could now actually be more funded and start to specialize on some things, including trauma. Because I think those doctors, the army doctors, the other doctors, sure, they do serve the military personnel, and they could also then, in supplementing the public hospital, so that all the resources of Kenya are available, but those ones now become what you would call high-level hospitals for PSS, for CSS, for these people, and diplomatic corps, other elements, then they could be of use in that same way, because they are still public hospitals. That's an idea. All right, so defund private facilities. permanently gazette that there shall be no public money for private facilities. That's it. This effectively defunds private hospitals by terminating the PPP framework in health. This is a tap. Switch it off. That's it. No more discussions, nothing. Finally, no, it's not finally, the second last one, restore public infrastructure. Restore full funding and staffing to public hospitals. When the workers and the money return, efficiency flows. Because if you switch off the tap for PPPs and for private insurance for the ones given to public workers, any Kenyan paid worker, then that means even the hospitals will have to downsize and those workers will come to public. That's natural. But for them to come also, there must be infrastructure. So that restructuring is important. That's why it's not just the people coming, but also the facilities must be there. The treatment, the theaters, everything that needs to be done should be done now. Then finally, end the private wings. The same way we have talked about the issue of rent, this is the same issue. If you allow the private sector to find a way to creep, then there is your problem, because it will finally at one time metastasize into a cancer of private capture. So end creeping privatization of hospital management. If you're a public serving doctor, you're a public serving doctor. The pay will be commensurate because everybody is coming there. That's the point. So the quote here is simple. Stop funding private healthcare with public money. 100% public financing for 100% public delivery. Lipa Shah, I have something else. The Lipa Shah Pole Pole initiative has already enrolled 411,011 Kenyans, mobilized 1.4 billion. This proves that massive demand for a public system exists. This is money to fund infrastructure and to bring the workers back. The problem is not the lack of resources or interest. It is the private capture of the funding mechanism. Exactly. This is not a third way. It is reversing the policy that created a parallel private system while letting public infrastructure rot. And that's what they did basically. They just made it rot. They left it there. And like we've said, if this continues, you'll start to see county hospitals now being fully captured. They'll start being privatized. And there's nothing you can do because they are just dead assets, because that's what they'll start calling them. So we now go to chapter 8, the book of education. This is a big book. It is many, many pages. So I'll read, then I'll come back to it. So I'll read fluently. So it will be a smooth read without interruption. And then after that, I can talk about it. The book of education, that's why it's not the basics of education. The system has never changed. The Kenya education system is the most worshipped colonial relic of all systems ever built. The colonialists built a machine. They scoured the villages for the brightest children, plucked them early, and placed them in elite schools far from their families. These children were trained not to lead their communities, but to serve the colonial administration. The rest were left with nothing. This was never about excellence. It was about control. After independence, the machine remained. The flags changed, the headmasters changed, but the hierarchy did not. The same elite schools, the same buildings, the same playing fields, the same chapel bells continue to produce a narrow class of the chosen few. Before the second wave, there were already national schools. The colonial relic was already in place, but rather than reversing this extractive system, rather than dismantling the hierarchy and keeping the children local, the neoliberal era added more national schools under Kibaki. Sorry, that's a segue. More of the same machine, more forced migration, more extraction. The system grew larger, but it did not change. Even now, in 2026, 13-year-olds are sent across the country for glory certificates. Why? Because the hierarchy remains and the corruption that fueled the colonial system never left. In the colonial days, a child could not enter a good school without a letter. A letter from the chief who rewarded his own children and those of his allies. A letter from the church which had its own favorites. A letter from the district commissioner who owed favors to the powerful. Today, the letters have different names, but the mechanism is the same. It is about who you know. It is about what your family can pay. It is about sponsorships. Who will fund your place? It is about connections. Who will call the principal? Who will write the recommendation? Who will pull the string? If you have money, you can buy a place. If you have connections, you can secure a place. If you have a sponsorship, you can claim a place. But you will have nothing. If you are bright enough to be called to these national schools, if you scored the marks, if you earned the place on paper, it often means nothing, because without the money, without the connections, without a sponsor, you will drop. You will fall to a more affordable school. You'll be pushed down the hierarchy. I'm going to segue here and say even some principals some parents come and say, leave our children alone with our high school fees, especially in national schools, because most of them are so rich or they don't care whatever they have to sacrifice for their children to go there. And that is what it means, that if you are so poor that you don't even have the chance to get yourself there, that is what happens. A lot of children, we say, are being pushed through sponsorships, but majority are not. Sponsorships are also in the places where these banks are, these institutions are. Most are left unseen and unnoticed. And that is the fate of the Kenyan human resource. The system was never a meritocracy. It was a network of connections dressed in blazers. That is why parents are willing to buy and pay everything they own for their child to get that blazer, that label to say, I went to Alliance, I went to Mango, I went to Starehe, I went to Precious Blood or whatever. I don't know. But it was like a good provincial school. I don't know what it is right now, sorry. But, State House, that is what they want to say. They went. And so those are the schools of the elite. From there, their life is set, while the rest of Kenyans have to wallow and struggle. So, and here is the greatest lie of all: free education, free primary education. The government announced it with fanfare. They called it a gift to the poor. They used it to shield the immense corruption industrial complex. See, they said, we care. Education is free for all. But free for all meant nothing, because they did not expand the infrastructure. They did not build a new classroom. They did not hire enough teachers. They did not equip laboratories or stock libraries. The budget grew. Kenya now spends 15% of its national budget on education, but the money disappears into contracts, into the pockets of suppliers and everyone connected to create ghost schools for capitation. The classrooms remain crowded. The textbooks remain few. And so, parents are burdened once again. Not only do they pay taxes to fund the education budget, then they have to pay school fees and other combined contributions. They also pay for uniforms, for books, and for transport and for lunch. Many give up. Those who can scrape together a little take their children to private primary schools, not because they want to, but because they must, because the public primary schools are underfunded, overcrowded, and failing. They send their children to private schools so that they can compete for spaces in public secondary schools, the top of the pyramids, the national schools, the elite hierarchy that was built by colonialists and expanded by neoliberals. Do you see the trap? Taxes fund a broken system. Parents pay again to escape it. The rich pay for the best private primary schools. The middle class struggles for affordable private schools. The poor are left in the public schools that were deliberately defunded and captured by the PPPs and suppliers and contractors. And at the end of this gauntlet, a handful of children, mostly those with money, connections, or sponsors, enter the national schools. The rest are sorted downwards. The system is fully, unashamedly built for the rich. Kenyans, I'm going to take a pause, because this is also the system that takes the majority of the Kenya's budget. You can see how it is built for them. So, back to reading. It was designed to be an equal. it has been preserved to remain unequal. The centralization of secondary education into national schools that was built by the colonialists, then expanded by the neoliberal, creates one, admission corruption. Those with connections enter, those without, even if bright, fall. Forced migration, because it's connections. If you don't have a sponsor, you don't have what, you won't go. And that's it. That's the system. Number two, forced migration. 13-year-olds are sent away from their families and communities. Resource hoarding. Concentration of facilities, laboratories, libraries, and trained, fully resourced teachers in a few elite schools while the majority decay. Isn't this the truth? Isn't this the sad, bitter truth? That those schools have everything, the few and the majority don't. We see this because we are seeing it through our children. We are thinking, oh, it's for the children. How? If, because also people want to enter the corruption zone, they want to say, I want my child to go to Alliance. I want my child to go where? That's it. Yes, and full disclosure, I went to Alliance. Full disclosure. So I know the system. Full disclosure, I have benefited by being part of Alliance. In fact, I do have meetings where the moment you mention it, or even job interviews, my job at Radio Africa, now this is a story, I'm going to segue into that. I went there and I had been recruited offline, of course, because of my special unique talents. And then when I went for the job and I met Martin Kafafa, I don't know if he's still the boss there, and he was the GM at that time. And just looking at, who are you? What are you doing here? Like, how did you even come? I'm holding an interview with you in the middle of the day. Then I mentioned I was in Alliance class of 19. He's like, oh, that's the first time I got the Alliance privilege, like in full color. It's like, oh, yeah, all right. And the rest is personal. But yeah, that's when I saw the change of even demeanor, like, oh, you're one of us, and I was welcome. And I welcomed it, by the way. And since then, that has been a thing. I enjoy it. It's a privilege. It's not something, something forced. I would say, I had assumed that I'll always get a job and a place and all these things. And even what I'm doing, because I thought I've been bright, I'm an A student. I just assumed these things came, and they do, because you can. But there are a lot of also very bright people who maybe did not get the cut for Alliance that I met in campus that have, even in future, after campus, have struggled because of that. Because you won't get that opportunity. You won't go to an interview and mention your school and everybody is part of you and they'll let you in. So, and yes, even when I started this channel, I remember 2 or 3 weeks ago, a guy called me and he's like, Miss Musyoka, Grace Musyoka, I'm calling you to insult you. He was a Luo. And he's like, why? Because the horror and terror I have faced from the clique of the cartel that is Alliance and Starehe in this Nairobi. And I just went to a simple school called Maranda, and they don't even recognize it, to be honest. When I was after campus, I met a guy who was very proud that he had gone to Maranda, and I didn't know that school because I only knew of a school called Friends School. I mean, in the 90s, some of those schools had really been downtrodden, right? So I knew Friends School, Kamusinga, and maybe, was it Kabianga or something? So I used to hear of those schools. Sorry, there are also boys' schools. So you have to forgive my ignorance. And also, I'm guessing the elitism is showing. So he said, and he was so proud, and I was like, what's that? And he felt so offended that we actually formed a friendship out of that offense. So I'm remembering now this other guy calling me to say, you're the first person who went to Alliance because I listened to you and your speech was speaking like group of schools. Apparently there's a thing called group of schools. I don't know what it means. Maybe there's a group of schools. I've not really understood it, but I see it a lot in comments. Like, you went to a group of schools. So anyway, so I'm guessing there's a group of schools that people have identified to be like maybe special. So I'm guessing Alliance is part of a group of schools. I see it a lot. So correct me. But yeah, that's what, anyway. So from group of schools, then, but I found you to maybe be very connected to the world. What broke you? because he thought I'm an anomaly, for having that kind of mentality. And then I told him, well, I've always been different. I remember in high school, now they said alliance, someone say, you would actually make a very good, I would be the person who would be called to raise issues that required courage, that the first person who raises it would be beaten or would be punished. We were not beaten in alliance, please. I understand the boys used to be caned, but for us, no, please. Oh gosh, now let me regale you. Come closer, let me now give you the secrets. No caning. I mean, surely we are bright. You cannot cane the future president, potential, whatever, advisor. So the point is, we were not caned, but you could be punished. And I remember when an issue that really needed to be raised, I was identified. And somehow, I think people found this in me. But I've also always been out the grid, but in the grid, I am self-driven, even being part of a crowd. So I really did not understand this privilege until later, because I had always taken it as a given that it was not a question to me growing up that I would go to Alliance. First, my sister went to Alliance, which for me meant that I had to go to Alliance or a better school at my time. The reason for that is because family competition is also very important. And so Diana going to Alliance meant that I had to go to Alliance, because at that time, Kenya High was fluctuating. So there were two good schools, national schools you'd choose. There was Limuru, potentially, Loreto Limuru. Then there was Kenya High and Alliance. Those were the schools in my time in the 90s that were still very good at choosing. There was Mary Hill. I don't know if it's still, yes, Mary Hill, Kenya High, but Alliance was the top. And in terms of national performance, you are number 5, 6. So yeah, you want to go to Alliance. So my sister, having gone to Alliance, that was set. By now, class 7, I knew I was going to go to Alliance, because now my sister was 2 years ahead. She's in Alliance. I have to go there. Why? Because it's number 5 in the national exams and whatever. It's the top girls' schools. You go there because that's the point. And so I knew that. And doing KCPE, being first in Machakos district, meant I would go there. It was never a question, really. Even when the results were announced, I knew I had passed, because I don't think I would have failed all my life. I was not unlucky in KCP. Sometimes you can be unlucky that you are sick, you've made a grave mistake and you fail. But I was still arrogant enough to think things will work out. And so going to Alliance was a given. And I met my sister there. So I even knew whatever was happening. And I had heard the stories. So I also wanted to really go there. But living that experience was also like the best thing that happened to me. The best thing that happened to me let me give the stories. Gosh, we are in resource holding, but that is actually the appropriate. There was everything. When I first went to Alliance, first the building, the green. It's not like Machakos was not green. It was 31st January 1996. You get in there, it is green. You have things. And I met my house mom, Jackie Kilel, the best person of my life. She saved me. And I know she knows. Anyway, Jackie Kilel was also the daughter of my sister. So it was like, that not sorority, but you find a very well-organized system of managing girls and passing on the legacy and tradition. And then I found everything that I could. I had interest in agriculture, I did agriculture, but I also have an interest in music. And then I went to chapel and I saw a real piano for the first time. And then it was not the only piano. You go to music room and there are pianos and piano. There were piano rooms. And I sat down and I played the do, re, mi, and it was playing do, re, mi. And I am crying. And I played and I was so good. And then I became so good. I taught myself piano. So good. And I remember some of my classmates who had been learning piano, because coming from some families, they had piano tutors, they had learned this in primary, but that did not touch me. I was so good. By Form 2, I actually led my house. House competitions were almost as competitive as inter-school competitions in Alliance. And I remember leading music and being so good at it that we were number 2. Set piece, not just the song that you have to read the set piece and teach people. So by Form 3, I was school pianist. I was good and became a music prefect without ever studying music. I think it was a break of tradition because, and traditions are very important in Alliance. You break the tradition by doing something that has never been done before. For example, how can the music prefect be somebody who is not a music student? But I was good. I had taught myself. And so for me, Alliance was the place that I learned that everything in the world is actually available. One of my best teachers was Mr. Agriculture teacher. Is it Dirango? I'm forgetting. How can I forget? He had a wife also, and they had different names, but that's expected. But I remember him telling us that because he was agriculture was very practical, and telling us we did a very big mistake by keeping rabbits instead of doing farming, because I think we were inspected and we had failed. And that is how I got to get a B or something in agriculture, and I feel bad. But I also know the mistake. And we were prepared psychologically that we were going to not do very well in agriculture because of that mistake. Subjects that you are guaranteed to get an A, right? But that ability to face that reality, I think, but also to talk in mature, you don't have to beat children. You are dressed like a person. That's when I learned. That is why I'm against what you call soft parenting. Because in Alliance, I learned it doesn't have to be soft parenting. You can actually prepare people for failure, for hardship ahead, by using a language at the level of understanding, and also by teaching people the realities of the world. So, because in the realities of the world, there's nobody caning you. There's nobody watching you throughout. But expectations are delivered and given, and you deliver and you are given. I don't know if I have made sense. So it is not just concentration of resource holding, of resources, of home science people could bake. They would bake the cake for the president, the food, everything. Like the facilities are there for all games and activities, computers. Mr. Brooke, one of those teachers who had been there since 1963, a white man, was our computer teacher in 1996. So the point I'm making is it's not just resource holding, but even how teachers treat you is very different, because they don't treat you like a failure. And I think because they have this place which is monitored and every parent's eye is on them, because we had very strong PTAs and boards that will make sure things don't go outside the scheme. Can you imagine if these resources, if now me as a parent in Machakos, my son is in Machakos, and if now my son goes to Machakos School, which is my neighboring school, in fact, my son is in Machakos Academy, which is next to Machakos School, and he goes there, the level of support and managing of this as a community to make sure Machakos delivers that for our children here in Machakos, as residents of Machakos, so that the resources they need, everything they need, we have a place of accountability. We're talking to the MP here. So that now our local MPs on, we are asking for these resources. Can you see accountability? So that my parents just used to hear of stories. In fact, in Form 2, when I had to choose music, my sister had to write to my parents and say, Grace wants to choose music. She'll become like a bangy person. I'll start taking weeds and drugs. Because I was already so progressive that my family did not want me to take music, because taking music would now make me the person I am today, like dreads and drugs. I'm not doing drugs. Not sorry. But the point is, they could already, I'm guessing they knew me better to know that I was this progressive person, and my thoughts were against establishment in this that I was questioning. And so they understood that if I went into arts, to wherever, it would be a problem. That's why I didn't take it, because I had to compromise. Take music or get school fees in a way. That is why I didn't take music, piano. But I beat them because I became school pianist, even after my study. Those are family issues. Point is, if we are able to concentrate so that parents don't have to pay money. My nephew went to Maseno. I remember when we had to take flights to go all the way to Maseno to arrive with my sister. And then besides that, why the people of Maseno deserve to enjoy Maseno school? The people here, and this is where I supported Gachagua very strongly, to say that the local accountability becomes very important. Because every place, every child, if national schools can fill students from national schools, although in Alliance, they also picked from provincial level. So there was that double benefit for people from central Kenya. At that time, I don't know how it is now, but at our time, there was that, which we gave them. But remember, at that time also, the national schools were the ones that were mainly functional, were mainly in Central and Nairobi. So there was also that disproportionate benefit that went there. Right now, things might be different, but they are also not so different, because now it's about money. Tribalism has been overwhelmed by the money. And so so you're creating the second level of elitism. So if you put that now, if you come and say now, here, and it doesn't even have to be Machakos school. There are so many other schools now. So that now children within Machakos and Machakos constituency and this area, they know this is the school I'm going to. Do you know how much efforts parents will put? MPs will now stop using money for bursaries. They'll actually build new infrastructure, a full, complete infrastructure. Because bursaries are basically corruption centers. Why? Why are you giving bursaries rather than building infrastructure for all? And that is also now another way of taking, of inequality. Kenyans. This brings me to the next point on page 15. We have finished the issue of resource hoarding. We got to accountability failure. Yes, a school 200 kilometers away cannot be watched by the parents who pay taxes for it. Exactly. Then the other thing is the perverted pyramid. The system values the degree above the skill, the certificate above the craft. Oh, I have a phone ringing. Sorry. Now, where is that? So hang up. Sorry. So Kenyans, it's true, we value the degree above the skill. We value the certificate above the craft. It produces graduates who cannot fix a pipe or repair an engine, but who expect to sit in an office. Cindy, all these government people, I've done a lot of interviews as a consultant for government projects, for public projects, and you find a lot of government people with even masters, PhDs, Dr. So-and-so in this, but they don't know the practicals. Then on that same interview, get somebody who has a degree, just a degree, but they've worked in private sector. You hear them, you hear the government person, like, get out of here. But since government values the degree, that guy is still be down to qualify because the degree is the thing. And yet these people are paid, they are promoted based on the degrees, they are sponsored for them. And the Kenyan private sector, you don't have that time. The demand of the work and the salary, there is no time for you to continue having useless degrees, as I call them. That's the Kenyan situation. And so we have produced a perverted pyramid. People who sit in the office with a lot of paper degrees, but they can't do the job. And that is basically all government offices in Kenya right now. Right now. And that is why they'll never even be able to have practical education, because they are beneficiaries of sitting down. I conclude that segment by saying it punishes the bright child who lacks a sponsor. That's it. That's it. That's our system. It is a perverted pyramid. Finally, the lie of pre-primary education, a shield for corruption. This is, of course, clear to all. No infrastructure expansion. Yeah. Parents burdened again. Private primary schools are the only path to public secondary competition, because the goal is to get your child to a national school. This is not a bug. This has been the system. It has always been the system. A colonial relic, expanded but never reformed. A machine that sorts children by connections and cash, not by merit or potential. The government releases 44 billion in capitation funds. It creates new examination bodies. It promises reform, but this targets symptoms. For example, one of the people being pushed for presidency, Matiang'i, exam cheating. They call them the exam cartels, but not the hierarchy that drives them. This is a 2007 report by Okech and Rolston. Yes. Matiang'i was praised by ending cheating. Has it ended? Exam cartels will continue to exist because that is what every parent is pushing for their child to go to a national school. Unless you are too rich now to afford a private school, secondary school. But we know that is limited. Therefore, Education Cabinet Secretary Julius Ogamba calls these the reforms. These reforms, the final nail in the coffin for examination cartels, but they miss the point. So it is not just Matiang'i, also this one, Julius Ogamba. But they miss the point. The structure itself is the cartel. The cartel from primary school, the free education, to the secondary schools where you have to go miles away, to hoarding of resources, to this accountability failure. It is an entire cartel. Everybody is benefiting except the parents, the citizens, and the children. Who is the beneficiary? Who benefits from this school education system? Those people. So they always will come with a new gimmick of reforms, of changes, but they can't change the system. By now, I think you have realized where the problem is. There is no accountability. It is a perverted pyramid. The papers are worshipped more than performance, skills more than advancement. And for you to get those papers and those certificates, you have to have that kind of money. So it is double rigged, triple rigged, 5 times rigged. So the 5 commandments of education. Number 1, abolish the national school hierarchy. Stop forced internal migration. Basic and secondary education must be restricted to the sub-county or constituency level within the direct oversight of both the MP and the MCA, the people whom you elect close home. Fully decentralize basic education for maximum accountability. Number 2, fully decentralize and localize access to basic education to reverse. So you abolish the national school system. Number 2, decentralize and localize access to basic education to reverse the colonial relic and neoliberal expansion that added more national schools instead of removing them. By this means now funding locally. The government, first you have abolished the hierarchy, but then you must fund it locally so that access is localized. Decentralizing means not funding now on that national level, but on the local level. Then decentralize TVET. Align vocational training with local county level economic needs. We've talked of them here. Farming, crafts, housing. We've talked of things like textiles, that industry. It should be funded locally. The things we've talked about, food. All the 6 things, the 5 things above should be done there. Medical workers. All these people. Orderlies in hospitals, the capacity, the work that will come down to the ground must be supported on the ground. Community health workers. Technical training in clinical work, mining, agriculture, construction, mechanics, and teaching should be available at the county level. I can't believe, anyway, it's the same brain that produced it. So let's proceed. Value skill equality with degree. And the inverted pyramid. A mechanic is not inferior to a lawyer. A farmer is not inferior to an economist. The nation needs both. The education system must reflect this. And even in terms of the way it is praising, we need more farmers than lawyers. We need more mechanics than engineers, whatever, economists, whatever they are. That's the point. Reverse movement for higher education. Reserve movement, for higher education. Only high value specialized colleges should require movements. It must be quote unquote worth it to move. You're moving for high value training. Universities can remain centralized, but they must be open to students from more counties, not just with connections, money, or sponsors. I know this is not common in universities, but remember, university tertiary education has been fully captured by the private ones through the PPCPs and others, and funding right now, help is not accessible. In other words, not with money. Money should go back to public universities and they should be centralized back again. And the lie of free primary education, either fully fund public primary schools with real infrastructure expansion or stop calling it free. Parents cannot keep paying twice. In other words, the system was never a meritocracy. It was a network of connections dressed in a blazer. Education should be for work, not glory certificates. Local education means local eyes, local accountability, and local skills. The system was never a meritocracy. This is repeated. I'll have to edit this in a big way. This is the reversal of a colonial relic that has never been dismantled. It is the reversal of a system that adds more national schools instead of removing the hierarchy. It is the reversal of a machine that sorts children by connections and cash, not by their minds or their hands. Remember, skills are important here. It is the reversal of the lie that free primary education means anything when the infrastructure is deliberately starved. Keep children local, teach them for the work that is needed. This is very important. Teach them for the work that is needed. Stop punishing the bright child who has no sponsor. Fully fund public primary schools so parents do not have to pay twice. This is not a new system. This is the system Kenya should have built at independence. It is not too late to build it now. So I have some edits to do here before we go to part 3. I'm going to take a break, mark the places for edits. I thank you for listening, and I'll be back shortly to continue with part 3 of this element. All right. I'm back for the final reading of the chapter known as the final refutation. It's actually not a chapter. Well, it is a chapter. And I looked, and behold, I saw a hyena standing in the crossroads of our history. It smelled the roasting meat of public good from one path and the scent of private profit from the other. In its greed, it sought to stand on both paths at once, planting its feet upon the third way, a path that does not exist. As the paths diverged, the beast was stretched, for no nation can serve two masters. It cannot serve the health of the citizens and the profit of the privatizer simultaneously. And the hyena burst asunder, for the third way was but a mask for the void. Behold, the shortcut has been revealed. It is not a new road we seek, but the destruction of the old one. The second way, the era of neoliberal capture and colonial echoes, must be removed in its entirety. There is no middle ground. There is no compromise with a system designed for your exclusion. He who has ears, let him hear. The time of the second way is at an end. There is no third way. There is only the removal of the old, and the nation may finally breathe. I repeat, he who has ears, let him hear. The time of the second way is at an end, and there is no third way. There is only the removal of the old, that the nation might finally breathe. The final verse. Here is the shortcut. Remove the lie. Remove its policies. Remove its brokers. Do not ask permission. Do not wait for a third way. The path is behind you. Walk backward to the fork. Take the road that was said impossible. Remind yourselves, you can feed, clothe, house, heal, teach, and move yourselves and your goods effectively and without the second corrupt way. That is not a dream. That is a memory. And a memory is the beginning of reversal. That is page 29. On page 30, I deal with citations and references. Let me quickly finish. This is not anything new. This is what you've heard along the chapters. This is the story of the hyena trying to take both at the same time. It cannot happen. The nation will break. The nation is breaking. The nation has broken. Some of the things are already gone. Right now, textiles, housing, these are gone. Education has never really, what is there? Health is going. We are just holding in the counties, waiting for the day they are going to come for it. Food is kind of gone. Right now, tomatoes are at, in Machakos is 10 bob a tomato. In Nairobi, here it is the price of gold, and so on and so forth. We can't feed ourselves. We remain vulnerable to anything that comes because Kenyans do not have a shelter anymore. This nation has become the thing that is used against them. Any storm, any challenge, anything that stands on our path seems to be taking with it so many Kenyans, anything, so many Kenyans at once. Why? Why is this? And so, this being the state of our nation, we have a challenge, we have a problem. And therefore, I have provided the third way as a no way. It is a way that will break us forever. So, in looking at the citations and references, because this book was created out of what you call the material conditions of Kenya, the known facts of Kenya, there is nothing new here. Even the recommendations are sometimes the unsaid words within each report. When they say private sector transport was captured and cartels loomed, then it means the problem is the cartels. Reports are meant to be read between the lines for you to understand, oh, so if this is the bad situation, and if previously the situation was not so bad, then what happened? The synthesis of what was introduced is what has inspired this book. But unlike what you would say, a socialist synthesis of a situation and a dialectical approach to the material conditions of Kenyans, all the references, all the sources, all the realities are found on existing texts, existing reports, existing submissions and policies that are already in existence in our current material reality. This is not a campaign promise. This is not a fantasy. This is not a prosperity gospel or any other mode that has been used to scam Kenyans into thinking there is a solution. This solution at the same time is not easy. The reversal is not going to be easy. A lot of the people who have been beneficiaries will fight, and they will fight with everything they have because we will be taking back Kenya. Every fight we know for sovereignty has been huge. It has been bloody. It has been long and protracted. It's been protracted. Sorry. The protracted fight is not going to be something that will be accomplished in a day or a year. It will take a long time. Sure, I say the policy is now, but the policy is what you put, then people start moving. And in that movement, even the beneficiaries will also fight because change is hard, especially change that is going to move people from what is known as comfort zones and convenience lifestyles that we don't even have the capacity to enjoy. So, my citations come from AGOA, Anderson, D. 2002, The Histories of the Hanged, The Dirty War in Kenya and the End of Empire by Wainfield and Nicholson. That's a publisher. We have Barasa et al. We have Bates R. 2014. Barasa et al. Is 2021, Recentralization within Decentralization, Health Policy and Planning. We have Bates R. Markets and States of Tropical Africa. Markets and States in Tropical Africa, that is University of California Press. We have Bogonko, SN92, A History of Modern Education in Kenya. Brookings Institute, Rwanda Textile Strategy, and AGOA. We have FAO 2024, GOK 2003, Free Primary Education, a policy paper. Ministry of Education, Science and Technology. We have IMF 2003, Kenya National Bureau of Standards. 2025 Economic Survey, we have the Kenya National Examination Council inquiring into examination irregularities in 2022. KNESE Bill of 2026, Legislative Transition from Kenya National Examination Council to Kenya National Examinations, something, KNESE and examination reforms, whatever that is. CLOP 2022, Towards a Political Economy of Transportation Policy. African Studies Review. We have Ministry of Agriculture 2025, Maize Production and Trade Recovery Report. We have Ministry of Education 2025. We have Ministry of Health 2026. We have Ministry of Mining 2023. Morris and Streets and Sea Burns 2016. Muria 1991. National Treasury Report of 2025. We have Okech M and Rollason C in 2007. We have Okech M and Somerset A 2010. We have Presidential Statement, January 2026. I read that one. Citations and references, you have the Social Health Authority of 2026. We have TI Kenya report of 2024, that is Education Sector Integrity Report. We have Tully, J. and Dixon P. 2005, Private Education is Good for the Poor. It is known as a study of private schools serving the poor in low-income countries. Cato Institute, yes. Like Americans have done. Look at their system. The benefit, I always say, of our friend Donald J. Trump is that he has brought to fore the element of the miseducation of the American public. If such a person who even went to an Ivy League institution, although we do know there are questions and whatever, the person who says he has the biggest, best brains, and the level of arrogant delusion that such a mind exhibits, not just in their own heads or within the privacy of their homes, but to the entire world, transmitted and transported through Truth Social and other social media channels, it's just astounding, because it means he has lived in an environment that has encouraged and allowed this to happen. Enablers left, right, and center. And previously, I used to think this was a Fox Media issue. Apparently, it's a wider American issue. And it's not just on the right, it's also on the left. Because when you look at now the way even policies and programs are being pushed, I'm not saying the entire population is foolish or an educator or lacks critical thinking. I'm saying no. The majority is, because if we say that Ruto is a symptom, the corrupt governments and systems you have established, for example, are a symptom of society, then we can also say the foolish ineptitude of the presidential elections is also a reflection of that society. And so private education, charter schools, and all these other corruption elements, yeah. White L in 2020 talked of the School of State, Colonial Education in Kenya, 1895 to 1963. Oh, yes. 2020 report that was examining why Kenya has remained as it has been took the study of 1895 to 1963. Kenyans, the system has never changed. It was being interrogated this time. World Bank 2004 report, World Bank 2005 report, World Bank 2016 report, transport policy. The other one is the Kenya economic report. And some quotations here. KNBS economic survey. Farmers sell at throwaway prices while food goes to waste. For the lucky, often connected few, produce is exported, but they pay for this privilege by accepting repressive prices. Yeah, you're going to get those apples imported from, is it Israel or Egypt? Desert countries. Desert countries, you guys, we are eating food exported very expensively from desert countries. We have our own deserts here or something close to it. We should be taking advantage. Do we have a desert? We have semi-arid, really, whatever. We have like better desert. And we call that progress. They take our tea because in the desert you can't grow tea. And they're actually the biggest importers. And they repackage it, Egypt, that is. Because they don't have that we have the weather. That's why I say one of the biggest things that Kenyans have yet to understand is even the slave crops, particularly things like flower farming and all these things that have been captured and are used to grow for Dutch companies and others. Because some people still believe that Dutch are not colonizers, bitch, place. The biggest like slave traders and the like from the Portuguese, then you get the Dutch. These are colonizers de jure. They've just had a good time of it rebranding. Because unlike the British and the French, they did not maintain military presence and they stopped being open agitators, but they rebranded into trade. Look at De Beers, look at what they've done in South Africa. In Kenya, it's the flower industry. And in flower export, you take our soil, you take our weather, you take our climate, you take our water, you take our people, our labor, our space, and create things that are not food. Kenyans are left starving. Kenyans get slave wages, and then you take it to Netherlands and those Amsterdam places, and then you make a killing out of it. Kenyans here get 15% of the total price of flowers. Yeah. And then they are here talking about how the Dutch are progressive social democrats. No, they're colonizers. They have just rebranded and they're good at it. Same as the Portuguese. Thanks to Cristiano Ronaldo, people forget that Portugal is one of the biggest perpetrators of colonialism, of slave trade. Even in Kenya, Fort Jesus, that is a Portuguese thing. Their history, their wealth, their calm presence is maintained because they have stolen for so long. I'm sorry to bring Cristiano Ronaldo here, but you all know my feelings about Cristiano Ronaldo versus Wayne Rooney and that thing that became a thing with the wink, and how I've never forgotten him and forgiven him truly as a Manchester United fan. So I decided to be petty as fuck, and therefore he bears the brunt of my pettiness now for the entirety of Portugal. And when I see him, he's the emblem of that. And sure, we had Nani later, and Nani was also a Portuguese, but because he was so ridiculously trying to be like, although there is a time he tried to come up, but it wasn't. The point is, fuck Portugal. Okay, so Rwanda banned Mitumba in 2018. While they lost AGOA benefits as a result, they proved that a ban is possible. The question is not whether it can be done, but whether there is the political will to do so. That is a Brookings Institute report of 2019. And my quote here, I quote myself because now I'm thinking, Grace is becoming an authority in this. Allow me to have my ego. And the system was never meritocracy. It was a network of connections dressed in a blazer. That is Grace Musyoka, North Hardway. The final quotation is that Kenya spends 15% of its budget on education, but the money disappears into contracts, consultants, and the pockets of brokers. The classrooms remain crowded. That is the TI Kenya Education Integrity Report of 2024. And then we have glossary of terms, because some of these things are new to Kenya, especially how you look at them and how they've been framed. It's very important for us to be on the same page. So you can start with page 32, that is a glossary of terms, or when something comes, you can come and check if it's been referenced. But you are listening, so... All right, the corruption industrial complex. The systematic layering of privatization, liberalisation, and public-private partnerships that has normalized the extraction of public resources for private gain. It is not a bug in the system, it is the system. That is why William Ruto could marshal money from private sector for affordable housing, put it in the tax, becomes housing levy, it is passed by parliament. And when all that is done, these things are sold to rich Kenyans who have not transferred effectively within less than 3 years. Public wealth, public land, public resources, public money into private wealth. Rent, property. Yeah. Now you don't need to go and steal acres of land. You just need to either be part of the PPP partnership, the delivery. So 5 billion project, you deliver a 1 billion project that you already make money. Then from there, you do the liberalization, privatization of this now. Once the government builds, you get it and you also become part of it. So you can imagine what a hassle it will be as Kenyans try to retrieve, for example, such housing. Because somebody who listened to this book said, if there's no reversal, this is not going to be a thing. But first, you must actually have this policy in place that now removes this element. Then reversal comes after. But right now, Kenyans are choked. They are starving. We are bleeding money to even the tax regime, right? And it's not coming back. So we are losing net loss. So you triage the Kenyan economy, the Kenyan situation, the Kenyan conditions, and then after that is now when you can talk of taking back, reversals, reparations. You unfold William Ruto, then you unfold, because also that's how you do it. You start with what was gained by William Ruto, because those ones have not yet had a foothold in a big way, and Kenyans are still sad about it. And then you use that to beat up the Uhuru Kenyatta elements. And now that one, not beat physically, but remove, because now you'll have also gained traction, you'll have found ways and systems, the loopholes and all these things. You'll have formed the laws, the courts, and the jail and the reparation terms, and we'll have known how these things are unwinding. Then you go back now to Uhuru Kenyatta and decide from 2013, if you've worked in government, if you've done this, if you've had a contract, you've had what, and that goes. The audit. Then now from there you do Kibaki. And then from there you say we are finished with the neoliberal policies. That's recovery. Then, after you have recovered that, you can imagine this will be about 10, 15 years. Sorry, I might even be dead, most likely. So if that happens, then now you go to now getting back the land. It will have happened because also at the same time, it's taxes. If you are paying land rates in Kenya and everybody, if you say things like land rates, who are these, who is this land? And with technology now, you don't have to fake who owns what land. It is possible. And with that map of Kenya, then you can see who owns. And with land, then redistribution. To whom does the Kenyan land belong? Are we going to be like Mao and say to the tiller belongs the land? But we are also doing mining, we are doing what? And so that it is subjected now to the same method. Who is owning mining land in Kenya? Who is owning farmland in Kenya? How did they get it? How did they acquire it? Then now you start choking off the industries, because by then they'll mostly will have been chalked, if you're talking especially processing and food processing and farming. And so you can see, if you start by what they're benefiting right now, you are able to bring it down to the base level, so that in 15, 20 years or so, when Kenyans are now saying, oh, the Kenyan land belongs to Kenya, then you'll realize at that time all Kenyans have jobs or an opportunity, the future is bright. And so you're like, now we must address the historical element before we go back. Policies, yes, would take a couple of months to undo, but recovery is one that will take, if you even address Uhuru Kenyatta second term and William Ruto 10 years, will take about 3 to 4 years to prosecute, to recover, to audit and all that. With AI, things might be easier and faster, but you want to do that. But it's better to start with William Ruto, then like that. And if William Ruto is president for the second term, so now it's even 25 years recovery. Kenyans. China did it very fast, but they were already socialistic in nature and they are meticulous record keepers. Money and tracing becomes easy, and they already have the Great Wall of Information where people are very well managed. Kenya doesn't have that. So it will take a time and a while, but we can also take lessons and whatever from them. So the corruption industrial complex, the rest I'll go faster. The second way, the policy architecture built by neoliberal reforms primarily from the early 2000s that has replaced public service delivery with market-led models. The second way is the corruption industrial complex. The third way, a rhetorical device, not a substantive policy alternative. This refutation argues that no such path exists because the second way has not been removed. Exactly. The second way, which is the corruption industrial complex. Now things are they're making sense. Then the original lie. You see, we've come from the second way, which is what we talked about, the third way, which you say is not available. So it's a device, it's a mnemonic, it's a device that we have used to help us understand where Kenya is headed. A third way is just, it's never gonna be the people who are claiming that. So the original lie is that they claim that Africans are inherently corrupt, incompetent, and lazy, and therefore cannot manage their own economies. This lie was the moral foundation of structural adjustments. Yes. Then we have slave crops, agricultural commodities grown for export rather than local consumption, structured on plantation models that extract value from Kenyan land and labor while leaving farmers poor. So you can say basically all cash crops in Kenya are operating this model. So you need to find out who is extracting, who is being extracted, who is getting the benefits. I'll give you the example of the coffee, of tea. Tea, I said, is 300 shillings per kilo per farmer, 750,000 farmers. When that money hits the Kenyan bank on Friday, it will be 300 shillings for 750,000 Kenyans, the farmers, the small-scale farmers. Out of that money, once it hits the account in Kenya, maybe Stanbic or something at the account, the bank will take 50 shillings or 25 shillings to process. From that money, it will take just to accept that money into the account. That is the cost, not just that money, that amount per farmer. So it becomes 275 or 250. I'm not exactly sure because now I'm operating from memory, from what I had been told by a team in Kericho. Then after that, the money goes to an external account. I think Citibank or some other American bank, because apparently Kenyans don't have capacity to distribute this money to the other tier 1 banks. So it goes to that and they take 10 shillings or something per farmer per kilo, not per account, for every kilo that was sold, basically. That's what it means. And then coming back, when the money comes back, so you can imagine how much is taken from the farmer. When they come back, it comes back now, it goes to what is called tier 1 banks. Tier 1 banks, kina KCB, kina Equity, whatever the tier 1 banks are, those ones, just think KCB level. And those ones now, they have now to put them into the individual accounts, but also KTDA. And there they charge 15 to 20 shillings or something. So first, and also secondly, it's very important to know, once it hits those tier 1 banks, only 90% is, they keep 90% of the money. So 10% is distributed to KTDA and the rest. KTDA takes about whatever, is it 90%? No, 90% is now what they keep. Whatever KTDA takes is money that goes to their holding companies. KTDA doesn't do anything. It is just people who have been put in boardrooms to manage affairs of another. So it's an office. It's literally what you call a broker office. There's nothing they do except circulate. That's their work, to help circulate the money of farmers while they are also eating that money of farmers. You can imagine it has now been handled by 3 parties, and the first big party to handle it is also an unfunctional party because they are an authority. And so from there, KTDA sends it to its holding companies. So you have the holding companies for green energy, for machines, the one for broilers and boilers and such. Then you have the one in Mombasa. Then you have even the one in Dubai, the DMCC dry pot. Instead of having it here in Kenya and we mix and we get the cheap Vietnam tea and other Ugandan, all these local teas, and use them and to blend and export directly from Kenya to anywhere in the world, we've given this job, we've put it in Dubai. Of course, the Kenyans, anyway, tumepatia Dubai jobs with our tea. You can see hapo inakulia KTDA. Anyway, whoever comes up with this is so intelligent. Stupidly, you're just taking advantage of these stupid Kenyans. Hawajui vile watu wanakula. That is how actually these people talk. Hapa ndio tunakula jameni. Let the policy, and that will just be an approved policy. And then the farmer gets between sometimes 30 to 25 shillings per kilo. And then the 90% of the money that was left there, that was with the banks, stays with the banks for 1 year, which they use for trading. This is the money that is now goes to retirement authorities, other trust and other things. The money that is used to prop now the local economy and also, like, I think, manage the corruption industrial complex. When you hear this money is discovered a few times later, the retirement funds and all these things, that's what it does. And so by the end of the year, like 2025, those banks had made, is it 1 or 5 billion in total? Like from that money of the farmers. And then they give them their money as it was. Yes. If don't hit something. Don't hit. Don't curse. I'm doing that for you. Sasa kila mtu hapa akianza kukas. Okay, all right. So today I have audience, and because it's the final recording and this needs to go to the producer. So it's like we are so fucked. Like, do we know? And then Kenyans now would be like, oh, ni Kale on Kale crime. But Kenyans, this is what has happened to everything. It's the same thing that happened to Pyrethrum, happened to tea. Everybody was talking of these deals and in fact, sugar happened in silence. I mean, in noise, because people were making noise, but they were silenced. It's the same thing. Every one of these things happened like that. Look at, like I talked of flowers. They leave the water dirty. They leave, like right now, Nakuru, Naivasha, those lakes are almost, the fish is almost not consumable, right? Because of the chemicals and all these things that are coming. And Amsterdam and those guys, they get their good, nice smelling flowers and they leave us with shit. So, Mitumba economy, the system of importing second-hand clothing that has made Kenya one of the world's largest dumping grounds for used textiles. Yeah. I'm still reading. This time I'm going to read because if I continue talking, I'll be too mad. Strategic Minerals, 2003 Declaration. Mineral deposits in Samburu, Kwale, Embu, Isiolo, Kitui, Migori, Taita Taveta, Tharaka-Nithi, Wajir, Marsabit, Tana River designated as strategic minerals but left undeveloped. Horizontals, basic infrastructure, water, road systems, power grids, drainage distinguished from verticals, buildings. Thank you. Work-led migration, creating jobs and housing in marginalized regions first, then allowing urban populations to move voluntarily towards work. Yes, people move towards work, not towards job searching. The hyena, a Kamba cautionary tale about a hyena who tries to stand on two diverging paths and is torn apart. This is refutation. It represents any sector trying to serve both public good and private profit simultaneously. One more time, page 33. Kenyans who are waiting for a third way will wait forever, for that path leads deeper into the woods with no exit. They may say we are using old maps because they believe in just walking. They are blind to their past, for they believe going on to the next thing is progress. This is a fallacy that people seem to believe it, that and the sunk cost fallacy. You can also go on and go further long until you fall off the cliff. That is the reality. That is not progress. We have looked at food, clothing, housing, transport, healthcare, and education. We have looked at the policies of the early 2000s and the colonial relics they preserved. We have looked at the corruption industrial complex that feeds on public money while people go hungry and clothed and housed and cured and taught and moved. We have looked and we have seen. There is no third way. The problem is not a missing path. The problem is the path we are already on. The corruption industrial complex built by neoliberal policies and colonial structures, deepened by Kibaki, continued by Ruto, and defended by those who benefit from it. I should say currently continued by Ruto because also Kenyatta, but you get my meaning. I should add that to the book. I think it will be important. This book is not a theory. It is a refutation, sector by sector, policy by policy, lie by lie. The shortcut has been hiding in plain sight. The 100% reversal of the second way. No fancy word, no Singapore dreams, no third way. Just removal of the second way, the corruption industrial complex layer. For Kenyans who have woken up, for Kenyans who have seen, for Kenyans that are no longer fooled, there is no third way. There is only removal of the second way. And I end. The removal version is a political and economic translation of Kenya's policy architecture. No divine claim is made, only a human one. That reversal is possible. Page 34 of 36. End note. From no third way to Jesus in Kenya. To the reader of No Third Way, thank you for reading. And you listener, thank you for listening. No Third Way is the foundational act of decolonizing our understanding of Kenya. It is a handbook for the how, a structural intervention designed to move us beyond surface level reforms, beyond symptom management, and toward confronting the root causes of our systemic crisis. This work names the wound. It traces the architecture of failure. It simplifies what has long been made to appear complex, but it is not and was never intended to be the final answer. Because a handbook for the action by itself is incomplete, action must rest on thought. Structure must rest on philosophy. Strategy must rest on a way of seeing. The next phase is the African gaze. To truly deconstruct who we are and how we have been conditioned to understand the world, we must adopt what this work calls the African gaze. This is not a metaphor. It is a shift in epistemology. It is the refusal to see Africa as a market, a recipient, or a case study, and instead to see it as a source of knowledge, of systems, of memory, and of future making. No third way gives us the diagnosis. The next work gives us the lens. Introducing Jesus in Kenya, foundational theory of the Dialectics Institute 2026 to 2031 and beyond. In other words, Kenyans, a lot of you come and say, you need to put this into action. You need to put these thoughts into a way that can be consumed. So I created what is known as a foundational theory of the dialectics of the Kenya system 2026 to 2023 by writing this book known as Jesus in Kenya. So let me read. If no third way is the remedy, then Jesus in Kenya is the philosophy that gives that remedy meaning, direction, and force. This forthcoming work evaluates the cultural, political, and psychological conditioning of the last 20 years and introduces a third element into Kenya's ideological conversation, African communalism. Not capitalism, not imported socialism, but something older, grounded, and lived. What Jesus in Kenya does. This is a radical African reading of wealth, power, and the gospel of the poor. It is the unburning of the mind, a recovery of historical memory. It brings together three forces. Number one, communism, as an analytical framework for shared resources and collective organization. Number two, Jesus, not as a distant religious figure, but as a political revolutionary actor who confronted empire and overturned systems of exploitation. Number three, African communal systems, Mwethia, Githaka, Jea, Kokwet, not theory but lived governance models that functioned without homelessness or systemic abandonment. That is the African way. The core argument, the great epistemological deception. This book confronts a hard truth. The quote-unquote kingdom of God, as traditionally preached, is a sophisticated psychological weapon designed to detach Africans from material reality. Yeah, from here where you are living to that future potential kingdom of God. Function of the ploy. By relocating justice to a post-mortem state, the empire ensures the oppressed do not seek it now, do not seek it in the now. This heavenly gaze acts as a sedative, blinding the victim to the theft of their land, wages, and children until the extraction is complete. It is a mortgage on hope for a heaven that never arrives. Yeah. Dedan Kimathi died clutching the Bible, bleeding on Kenya's land that had been gifted to the king of Britain or whoever was the monarchy at that time. The land had been stolen and he was being jailed through laws he did not grow up with, his ancestors did not grow up with. His blood fell on this land to water this land that is now being conditioned and used to grow things and crops for export to be eaten or enjoyed by people afar while Kenyans starve, while Kenyans are hungry, get poorer and poorer. And should they protest the conditions of this imprisonment, this life, they are called terrorists in their own land. That is the reality of Kenya's material conditions. Page 36. The Ponzi scheme of the soul. This deferred promise is an archaic tool used by elites to maintain chains. It exploits a dark dialectic. In a system of extraction, a slave often dreams of owning a slave rather than achieving freedom. A people trained to value poverty as a blessing will never rise to dismantle the system that impoverishes them. Somebody said that if you go to a church in Muthaiga, which is mainly there for the domestic and other workers working within those homesteads, they were not going to say that a poor man will not be able to pass. It is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of the needle than a rich man to pass through there. They will speak of poverty as a blessing. The meek will inherit the earth, and so on and so forth. They have to condition them so that you have a Ponzi scheme of the soul, that I mortgage my soul for the future and I suffer my body here and now. For they also, this is not a religious text, and it is not that. It is just the epistemology, the knowledge that has been used to curate and to infect the African brain for the last 100 or so years. Jesus in Kenya deconstructs this capture, revealing a revolutionary Jesus who demanded a communal reality on earth, a threat so great the empire had to kill him to protect its interest. Yes, in that book, Jesus is born in a captured land. Remember, they were under the Roman Empire. There was King Herod, who was a cruel king, and later he was sentenced to death by Pontius Pilate. This is a lived reality of the empire reign of the world. He was born in Judea, in Nazareth. His parents, his family had to escape to Egypt as refugees when he was born. That is the material conditions that people don't really ask about Jesus. Why did he go to? It was not just because Herod wanted to. This was occupied land. The same thing that is also happening, say, in the reports that came this week was that Israel, the IDF had been commanded to kill every male child in Gaza. They were systemically just removing them. And even when you look at the slave trade that was happening in Africa by the Arabs, they would go and get castrated. The males were castrated in Egypt before being transported as eunuchs into the Persian, into the Arabian kingdoms. That is what happened. And therefore, this systemic thing is normal. Is what the Arabs do. It is what that region does in terms of enslavement and occupation. This is the reality that he was born into. He's not white or whatever. I don't care either way, because, but people have been led to believe that this is a triumphant figure who was born. He was sharing food because there was barely any food. The church was the place of refuge, but the temple had mortgaged itself to the Romans because they were the local collaborators, the ones who managed the locals, the Judeans. So that's what they were doing. And Jesus went there and was unhappy. Overturning that, he was overturning their tools of trade. It's like coming here now today and saying, you banks, you in multinationals, you DMCCs, you whatever, we are not, you brokers, leave. This belongs to the farmers, to the miners, to the Kenyans. You horticultural corporation, whose interest are you taking care of, KTD, whatever? Yeah. You, as the president, inviting Emmanuel Macron in Kenya, the guy who has the French have the worst historical colonial history and legacy in Africa. They live on our gold, on the African gold. They heat themselves with uranium gotten from Niger. The minerals and the labor and the extraction they've brought upon this country, their currency. Africans make their money, make their wealth, generate and extract from the land, and they bank using the franc for Africa, that currency. The Bank of France controls Africa, and yet Kenya is inviting them after they've been kicked from the Sahel because they need an entry point, and Western Africa, they have been having problems. The Senegalese are trying to push them out, the Gabon and the rest of the people are trying to push them out, and yet Kenya offers refuge to the enemy of Africans. What good has France wrought to Africa? France, when the Germans walked into there, because they were having their beef according to the sharing of the spoils of war in the First World War, when the Germans, Hitler walked his troops into France, they ran to Africa, to North Africa, and they brought the war to Africa. More Africans died for the Second World War on behalf of France than the French themselves. Yet they are the ones who got to curate the world after the Second World War. In fact, while Africans were dying and trying to rebuild, France went to the IMF, this institution. Don't think while Kenyans are crying about IMF in 1986, the Franco-African countries, this was set up in 1950 so that their currency was linked to the French so that they could pay them for colonization. They call it French assimilation. The Haitians have to pay for slave trade, for being. We are not getting mad. I can't. Let's proceed. The framework of the book. Jesus in Kenya deconstructs this capture, revealing a revolutionary Jesus who demanded a communal reality on earth, a threat so great that the empire had to kill him to protect its interests. The framework of the book. This book will be available in June. So this being page 36 of 36, I will finish with that and just give you what the book will have so you can see what to look forward to. Part 1, the stage. The political economy of Jesus' time, like I said, debt, occupation, and imperial control. That is the reality. Number two, so that we stop focusing, you use the great book for yourself. Some people call it so. Number two, the great reversal. Why the eye of the needle is a structural critique, not a moral metaphor. Part three, the confrontation. Why the systems of power must eliminate those who reorganize the poor. Part four, the African mirror. Mwethia Githaka Zear Kokwet. Governance models before the deception and organized society before disruption. That's the African society. Part five, the comparison. Jesus, Marx, and Nyerere. Points of convergence and divergence. Part 4, 5, 6, the present. Modern Nairobi. Why isolated acts of kindness cannot resolve systemic extraction. Yes. Even if today you came and did one good thing, Harambe, you did what? It's not going to resolve. We are feeding a bottomless pit. Therefore, a final word. No third way gave you the diagnosis. Jesus in Kenya gives you the lens to see through the Ponzi scheme. And I finish with these words. The slave who dreams of heaven remains a slave. The slave who dreams of freedom becomes a revolutionary. What comes next depends on what you see. Thank you for listening. Welcome back to the third and final recording of the podcast, of the reading of the book No Third Way. This time it's evening, it's 4:40 p.m. It's an after-school moment, so you can expect we are going to have potentially some noise outside. But let's have fun. Let's have fun of it. Part 3 is the revelation. Basically, this is page 26, so we go to chapter 9 on page 27. Chapter 9, the shortcut. The claim of a third way collapses under scrutiny. Each sector shows the same pattern. A functional base system once existed, but a layer of liberalization, privatization, and external dependency was added. That layer is the corruption industrial complex. Remove the layer and the system stabilizes. That is the shortcut. What I have described across food, clothing, housing, transport, healthcare, and education is not a new model. It is the reversal of a specific policy architecture implemented in the early 2000s. That architecture consolidated under the administration of President Mwai Kibaki 2002 to 2013, when Kenya fully operationalized long-standing structural adjustment framework, that is trade, liberalization, privatization, public-private partnerships, and market-led service delivery. This is according to the IMF 2003 and World Bank 2005. This is the second way. It is the system that produced food dependency amid agricultural capacity. Yes. Textile collapse amid global trade access. Imagine. They really lied to people that if we open our market, we'll also be open to them. They can bring their food. You can compete with Uganda, but we'll also sell to Uganda. Oh, poor Kenyans. Number 3, housing speculation amid urban poverty, right? Speculation became normalized. It became the thing. Actually, under Kibaki, part of the failure of Konza City, of all these programs, is because they became too expensive to implement, to be part of it. And of course, we had seen already the corruption industrial complex in contract, the PPPs and other things under Kibaki. Anyway, moving on. Transport chaos through privatization. One of the things that I've had to face on the channel is people telling me my Kibaki brought boda boda. And the question I ask of them is simple. You build Thika Road and you expect to finance it using boda boda. In other words, the item that you say this guy brings in a superhighway, and the mode of transport that you say he has liberalized or opened to the Kenyan economy is the bicycle. At that time, in that moment, Kenya would have been in a very good place to purchase public transport in Nairobi, especially, and that would have potentially followed suit. But because Michuki had and his people under the Michuki rules, that sector had been conquered. It was never coming back. And when the costs were rising and all that, we were told to have motorbikes. You can't do that. You can't. Then we have healthcare inequality through private capture. I remember Charity Ngilu, who was a minister under Kibaki's government at that time, trying to protest in a solo effort to deny that element, saying she'll go to Kenyatta until wherever. I don't know if she still goes to Kenyatta because that dream died more than 10 years ago. But that is how much she had pushed at that time. She was once a champion of the people, and that's what she pushed very seriously, very strongly. And then education distortion through centralization. Yeah, that's a fact of Kenya. We know the blazers. There is no third way. There is only a reversal, sequential, sector by sector, policy by policy reversal, Kenyans. The commentator who called me foolish for not seeing Ruto's third way has it backwards. I see clearly there is only removing the second way, which means 100% reversal of Kibaki-era neoliberal policies. Let me say why this was inspired by a comment. This entire book was inspired by a comment from somebody who tried to massage William Ruto's neoliberal corporate, whatever, theft, corruption industrial complex by saying, we need to understand and accept William Ruto for what he is as a system and a government and a personality that is linked with corruption. I don't want to accuse somebody, but you know what I mean. And as a result of that status of his being, that corruption is the business du jour, the identity du jour of our current president and the government, then we should then be able to realize that he's also trying to find a way to offset what was ideally the Mount Kenya mafia, and with that, introducing what you would call corruption among other parts of Kenya in order to destabilize, the head, the leeway, the headwind that the Mount Kenya people have had. In other words, this listener was trying to tell me I'm foolish if I don't myself grasp the opportunity of becoming part of the corruption industrial complex, just like the other people previously have done, and so that we can balance out the imbalance of Mount Kenya regions, having had Jomo Kenyatta, who was very huge in that way and had the longest leeway. Then you have Mwai Kibaki and Uhuru Kenyatta creating that concentration of centralized power. And so I realized that these people, because of that, I would call it cliff, they've already dived off the cliff of both sanity, both patriotism, both nation, both even citizen. They are outside the humanity of the Kenyan citizenry. They are thinking of themselves and a way to become primitive wealth accumulators, or at least to be beneficiaries of the corruption industrial complex, as you have put it now, that you can see as Kenyans. Corruption now is not just going there and extorting people money on transport, or it's not taking land, because how much is left for taking? Then like an intellectual person should now no longer be opposing, but should actually be able to join in the shit eating, basically eating Kenya's, being part of the state capture and enjoying that. And he called me stupid, foolish. Those were the words, because I was not able to join in, and I would be of big utility to the government or to these people. And so Kenyans have now learned to recruit, to co-opt fellow Kenyans for whatever value that they see in them, to silence. I'm guessing that is to silence, and for me to be having partaken in this so that it becomes, I cannot talk about it or I cannot bring it out. But the point I'm making is that it's now been accepted within a certain class of Kenyans that this is the only way, and so we have a problem. In other words, we have a problem as a country. People now are openly recruiting people and openly promoting corruption because it seems to be their way out. In one of the live sessions the week after, or last week I didn't have one, so the week before, another two came. They were actually bragging, telling us how they had to pay a certain senior politician to get 5 billion for urban, for the affordable housing. And now it's okay because they got jobs and they did not need to import those jobs from China. And so we had to call them out. I had to call them out and tell them they are also promoting corruption. And of course, after that is when we started getting the reports of these houses private. And I had to explain to him the housing. How do you transfer public asset into private hands? Number one. Number two, I then had to explain to him the corruption. They already took money from Kenyans, public resources. They took land from Kenyans, public resources, used money from Kenyans and Kenya's land, which are two types of resources, created private wealth. They paid themselves already, they benefited, and now the rich will benefit, and Kenyans will never see that. Kenyans as a whole should have benefited from those housing, or it should have led to production in order to pay back for that, but it didn't. And he doesn't, a lot of Kenyans are unable to see that, not because they can't think or reason or they lack critical thinking faculties, but simply because to them, it is better to join than to be out on your own. And that is the strategy of Kenya. And that is why I felt I need to write this small handbook so that it becomes something that if you want to find out what is the corruption in this deal, because everything that we do, there is always corruption. I think the more people get now familiar with this, when you see something that has a PPP, when you see something that has a contract, as we were talking today, when it comes to production, that then you know that's a problem. That's a problem. All right. So continuing page 29. I did not name Kibaki earlier because this is not about a man. It is about a policy architecture. Yes. One of the things that I had in this channel was having to explain to people that Kenya's problems, almost 50%, 60% of what we see today is as a result of President Kibaki's policies, because he was able to remove all of Moi's or undo most of Moi's issues and replace them with the neoliberal systems. That's number one. The second problems, of course, come from the founding of this nation, in that we are not a sovereign nation. And so this mainly come from both what the British captured and have never given back, and of course the original sins committed against Kenya, which was the stealing of land and taking of land and the refusal to return the land by the Jomo Kenyatta government. Secondly, the suppression of the working class by, first of all, monopolizing Kotu and all these other systems that were done. And then thirdly, the refusal to remove and to expel the whites, the British, and also the Asian colonizers who came with them from this country, so that now we remain with three colonizers on top of now the nation. We have one, the British colonizer, who are supreme and all that. They recruited with them, among them, the ruling elite. Under that, we have the Asians who came and have now taken over most of Kenya's elements of production. They live in very secluded, racist regions and situations, and have been a terror to the Kenyan citizenry through business. It has been a violent business terror on Kenyans, and it is not so discussed because they have managed somehow to insulate themselves from the political conversation of Kenya and hidden behind institutions such as KEPSA, CAM, the Hobby Lobby, and then supported a lot of what you call civil societies, and appear to be among the business and coming and say, let's have peace, let's have vote. And so that even absurdity of refusal to engage in the political conversation is in and of itself the thing that is the most obvious, because how can you be absent? And yet you are the most present. And you can see that now in the recapture of our manufacturing, our mining. They have gone into all of that, and also sugar and other farming elements. So when you look at Kenya through the second colonialists, because this is what happened, especially in Western Kenya, who got recolonized by that. Because for a long time, a lot of people from Kisumu used to brag, oh, we have a lot of Asians, you have a lot of Asians. You have a lot of foreigners in your land. You have just never been, it's been blended to them to see them as foreigners. There's not the same way you hear people in, like if you're complaining, you have a British, it's the same. It's the same. Finally, the third one is, of course, now the emerging political class. They are not like the bourgeoisie people who came from the elite, the the Koinanges, the Kenyatas, those Gisherus, the people who were part of the Kiambu mafia. No, we now have the emerging ones that have come with Kibaki, the ones that were part of the Moi government and rose with it. So Moi Kibaki was the DP for Deputy Vice President of Moi. He was also Minister of Finance. The things that have been crafted to bring Kenya down. He has a long-standing history of being the architect of Kenya's downfall with his elitist land and business education. Then he knew how to hide it in a way that was not visible to Kenyans, and he had good PR, unlike Moi, who was a blunt tool. Yep. So, like I've said, one of the other things that we've been exploring since April, is the betrayal of what you call the intellectuals of Kenya. Because the intellectual, even now as we discuss the issue of Macron and how the CSS, the PSS, all these people have Ivy League education. They have worked for the World Bank, the USAID, the GIZs, all these institutions that they are in friendship with, the foreign in friendship. They don't see that they are catering and pandering to the enemy. And that is why even for Kibaki, it looked so good, because in the capture of Kibaki, it looked like he was undoing Moi's things. He did the same thing that Jomo Kenyatta did, in that I'm taking away the enemy and now allow me to do whatever I want. And he had that carte blanche of doing whatever he wanted. By the time Kenyans realized 2, 3, 4 years down the line, especially when the scandals started coming, because now the scandals were, remember Mwiraria scandals, Anglo-leasing, these things that now are coming out, the drug barons in State House, they were like, what? Because you understand that a lot of Western banks have been managed and financed by drugs, the drug cartels. Kenya is now leading in this region as drug and human trafficking central. This thing did not start yesterday. It did not start with Uhuru Kenyatta. It started back then. When you're finding Eastern Europeans here in this country with guns and ammunition and all that, then you know it's about to go down. It's about to go down. And it was bad for Kibaki, because then Kibaki also, because of that entire Mount Kenya mafia, and the fact that now they were stealing the state, they were stealing whatever Kenyans had been able to build now for those 40 years. And the theft was so instantaneous that even the banks, look at the banks, he comes, takes very small banks, they are given state funding under the name of a certain program, youth program, women program, any program, they get capitalized. And then after capitalization, they become so big, they are hawking jobs, they are opening all over, they are hiring people. At the same time, he's closing cooperatives. He's removing people, putting them into banks and financing institutions. And so people could not complain. And even when it came to crime, Kikuyu on Kikuyu crime, because there has never been a president in this country who killed more of his own people than Kibaki. Tell me who. Even Jomo Kenyatta, vile as he was, even including that he instituted a war against the Somali, he did not go to the extent of exterminating his people, because the genocide committed under Mungiki extermination, that was a thing. And that now became the blueprint that was used, we understand, in future governments, because you form a special police, whatever, to remove people. And then after you have killed people, then it is done quietly, slowly, extrajudicial killings. In fact, the people who brought this, Oscar somebody and another guy, they were assassinated on Apple, University of Nairobi. I'll never forget that image. So we have, as a nation, there has been a very consistent amnesia of what happened to Kenya between the year 2003 and 2013. The only thing that seems to come out of it are two things. Number one, the Constitution of Kenya, which also had been carved out all its meat, and it was left with just a skeleton, and the skeleton that cannot stand on its own. As you can see now, it's progressive, but it can't stand. And the other thing was Raila Odinga, government of national unity, and then tribalism was suppressed. So you take the biggest wound that had been used against Kenyans for 50 years, you bury it. Okay, at that time it was not 50, but almost 45 years or so. You bury it within now business community saying, kazi iendele. And that's why I say that's when the Asian, whatever, rose. And then you're also finding now the business community. And then money now comes above tribe. And so they could be able to co-opt a lot of MPs. When a bill was unpleasant, Kibaki, that's a time now they started being bought off. You can imagine this person who spearheaded the second liberation of this country is coming in a way that if a bill is not pleasant, you pay off the MPs. The word, the coining of the word MPs was under Kibaki. Kibaki bribed MPs in two ways. The first is, of course, the direct bribes for these bills to pass, for things to go his way. Secondly was the CDF. Our CDFs, our MPs are wildlings. They've been given, and of course, all the benefits that came, retirement, hospital, insurance, all the things to make them cushy, so they could support. And that is how Kenya was stolen by Kibaki. The Kenyan state in its democratic identity was also stolen by Kibaki, because even these policies have now become easier to pass because he provided the blueprint. I am so sorry that this is what happened. So now after Kibaki, everybody knows you just buy the MPs. And if you don't, you impeach them. As Sonko was done by Uhuru Kenyatta, Gachagua was done by William Ruto. So the blueprint, so the passing of unfavorable bills becomes easy because you just need to buy them. And so the Hobby Lobby now gets its clutches, because to finance those buyouts and all that, the corruption, it's not really buyout, it's corruption. It needs to be financed, and the beneficiaries are business elites. And so that is the thing. And we'll explore that, of course, in the book, the foundational book of the Kenyan architecture, because some of you are wondering what I'm talking about. But essentially, since before I started this channel, I have been doing what is called the architecture of Kenya's foundation. And there is, if you have this, you can enjoy a free copy of, just come and say, you said I get it so that I know you got it. A free copy of, it's free anyway, but remember, you can ask for that, where I've talked of an introduction to the architecture of the Kenyan society. Basically, how Kenya was formed and how the initial, that's why I say the basic theft was done by the British and then segmented, like made into law by the Jomo Kenyatta administration. So you can see the architecture of the Kenyan state, how it is formed. All right. So, the Kibaki era, back to reading. The Kibaki era is when Kenya fully embraced the structural adjustment logic pending since 1980s. Moi fought against this, and the more he fought, the more those educated motherfuckers started telling us, oh, Bretton Woods institutions, this London School, Makerere educated elite started now siding with the foreigner. This was the first time in our time we saw Kenyans, the lead, especially now, looking outside for help. And you know what happens when they help? Right now we know they come, they help, but under conditions. That is how Trump told us in March. He said when they went to Iran, they funded the people, the opposition, and the opposition was supposed to help take out the supreme leader so that they could come in and get. And then when they funded the people, they are also now fighting them with their own guns and the cards. You can imagine them funding people they had initially said were terrorists. That's the same thing that seems the capture of Kenya. Another one we got was also in Venezuela. You fund people, you bring chaos, you remove the guy who is against you. And that was Moi. By now, based on how easy it was to undo everything Moi had done transport, he had done hospitals, he had done schools, he had done universities, he had done a lot of polytechnics and colleges. In fact, one of the things that Raila had to stand his ground was the issue of polytechnics. It didn't go his way, but he really, really fought Kibaki on that. Then Moi had also done an opening of what you'd call the marginalized states, places in Kenya. Yes, there was corruption, but that corruption, whoever had the money, the corruption was also part of him trying to remove workers. And yes, corrupt and also brutal. Yes, Nyayo House Chambers remains, but at the same time, and assassinations, just like Jomo Kenyatta. Jomo Kenyatta did not have torture chambers, but he kept some people detained forever, like Elijah Masinde and others. But it was just brutal killing. So Moi was a fool He was street smart, but he lacked the intellectualism that is required to steal a state, as Kibaki did. But he also understood sovereignty in a way because he had been a freedom fighter. And while he was not a Nandi, because the Nandis are some of the biggest resistors to colonization up to this day, we need the Kipsigis to also get to that, because the Kenyan tea, the theft of Kenyan tea and giving sovereignty to the UAE and the banking system will only be unleashed if the Kipsigis rise up against that kind of system, because they are holding it together. If you find the Kisis, and even if you go to Mount Kenya, you'll find the small scale farmers are willing and are able to remove themselves from this jugular, the way they've been captured. But we need that to come out of this. And now I'm being tribal, but I apologize. I didn't mean to be tribal, but this is grown within specific regions. Because how can Kenyans be told you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this, and you are so dated? Kibaki did Kenyans wrong. Now look, we are a Fuliza economy. We were once Chama economy where everybody had savings. My grandmother had more savings than I do. Based on the exchange rate. And here I am, an alliance-educated what? We are just living like this. The COVID took us out. For me, I admit, yes. I don't want to admit, but let me admit. Now that I've mentioned my grandmother, I love my grandmother. I loved her. She brought us up. She's the mother. I think if it was not for my grandmother, I would have gone bad. She was the best thing. That is why in Mother's Day, Sunday, I had to dedicate a thing on unpaid labor. The cost of raising the African child has been greatly by the grandmothers of this world, because we broke the community, we broke the kin, but they are forced to take care of their grandchildren, unrecognized and unpaid and unmanaged. And that institution of motherhood, not women. I'm an independent woman. I know my rights and I know I have it better than even a lot of men. Not better, but I have that same stature, right? I have that, I know. But I also know I'm a woman who faces some existential threats, being female, the violence and all these things that can happen to you just for being female. And I've addressed that on the channel. But the thing that the world has refused to address is motherhood as the institution, because being male or female is what I would call, and what I call in my book, in my write-up, which is on my Patreon, so I don't even need to tell you, it is what you call a political category. You are male or female, just for management. Because if you go to the animal kingdom, people, they work together. And if you go to African society, it was kind of similar. It was, we are community, but you go out there, you go in here, and all that. There was not that distinction. Distinction with the privates only came to manage gender-specific elements of life. But there was no that delineation of the genders. The political identity was now applied both in Western and Eastern elements, and of course by the religious sects, so that now we were differentiated. So that categorization is different. But in all that, whether it is East or West, and now what is happening in Africa thanks to now colonization, which is West, and also Abrahamic religion, which is also West or Eastern, depending on where you think Jesus came from, then you find now the motherhood institution in the entire world has been suppressed. It has never been recognized. The rights of the mother up to this day now have adopted that all matrilineal lineage. Africans were the only remaining people in the world who had elements of tracing themselves to their mother or to their matrimonial home. Even Akamba, when you're married, you become somebody, right? At home. People never called you by your husband. You were called by your father. But the only people in Kenya who are fighting, finish the Kamba story first, Grace, finish focus. So in doing that, then you find you maintained that. There, you never left. Even in Luo Nyanza, where it was patrilineal, but that bond and home remained. Now it is kind of going. The link and the whatever of motherhood, the institution is dying. That is what I admire very much about the Kikuyu woman now, the modern Kikuyu woman, who has been able to maintain the motherhood institution. Because the reason I call it an institution, because it's not a category. Motherhood is, first of all, genealogy. You are the creator of a line. Without you, there is no drawing that lineage. There is no genealogy without the mother. That is the first and foremost institution of the mother. Why am I talking about this? But I'm here. Let me finish. Secondly, by giving identity, the child of the Kikuyu then is not born in limbo. Despite the Kikuyu having been one of the most dispossessed people in this country, their mothers have managed to give their children home. Somebody on my comment section came and said the Kikuyu women are not woke. Okay, you guys, I respond to this because it is a dialectics channel. Therefore, you have to dialectic. Dialectic is talking. You input, I input. You input, I input. So when somebody injects that, because I think a lot of people, particularly from Western Kenya, they believe because of that patriarchal element and also how outspoken and also considering Kikuyu and the religion and the way it is so pervasive. But don't forget, whatever religious element ails or has been input to sanitize the Kikuyu is the same one in Luo Nyanza. The only difference, I'm observing this as a Kamba, because both communities have been totally able to erase what you call their traditional practices. So religion has done its part in both. One side thinks they haven't, but the only thing that has left of them is circumcision. And I'm putting this as being somebody who is not a proponent of circumcision either way. But the point is, one brags of the other and the other doesn't. And that is only what you call traditional practice that they seem to honor. So out of those practices, you find now somebody saying Kikuyu women are not woke. Hey, Kenyans. They are the only people in this country who will potentially become a case study for Africa as we try to get back the African gaze to help us develop the African gaze, because at least there is something to look at, something remaining. You will see a man and his name is now like me, Grace, and my son is Anthony Mudeu or Anthony Grace, and that's a thing. That's a thing. It's not a thing elsewhere. The other tribes have been shamed to naming their children after their own fathers. People. Anyway, my admiration of the Kikuyu. By the way, I have something to admire from every tribe, so don't get it twisted. Don't get it twisted that I have something against one or the other tribe. By now, if you have been to my channel, you know it is all equal. Neri! Okay, I think is it 5? Yeah, by then my dog keeps time and it's now 5:10. So I have to go and feed him. Then I'll be back. This was only 35 minutes. But before I disappear, let me finish the structural adjustment logic. Since 1981, trade was opened under Kibaki, protections were removed, public services were outsourced, housing became a market, transport became a cartel, education became a migration machine. The Kibaki era in Kenya is when Kenya fully embraced the structural adjustment logic pending since 1980s. Number 1, trade was opened. 2, protections were removed. 3, public services were outsourced. 4, housing became a market. 5, transport became a cartel. 6, education became a migration machine. Therefore, I'm going to finish this chapter and then we'll keep quiet. The sequence of planned recovery. Reversal does not mean chaos. It means sequential planned recovery. Like I've said, there is nowhere here where I only gave it one phase. So phase 1, in housing, build in marginalized regions first to ease urban pressure, then return to mend the cities. I think this was very clear. 2, in transport, make it 100% public through buyouts, not force, starting with major corridors. Number 3, in health, stop funding private care immediately. The public system still exists. It is simply defunded. That's it. By the health is the easiest to recover. In education, keep children local starting next term. No new admissions to national schools. If we said 2027, although they can't do that during an election year, but that can become a thing by the next president. Number 5, in agriculture, block imports, Restore strategic reserves within one growing season. That is true. Number 6, in textiles, ban Mitumba with an 18-month transition for retaining local production. Of course, so that in that 18 months, you get fabrics, you build skills, and people start the first industry. Back again, revitalizing that industry. In other words, reversal does not mean chaos. It means sequential planned recovery. And that is page 29 of 36. I have to go and feed my dog because he feeds at 8 is now, at 5 is now 5:13. Before he comes again, let's not be cruel. When I return, I will go to page 29 to talk about the final refutation. Asanteni sana.